Chapter 670. Su Yingtian could not think of anyone who would be as daring as Tang Zheng. Such a daring person was rarely seen in the world, treating all power and prestige as child's play. Marshal. Tang Zheng replied. Su Yingtian was slightly startled. A tall figure and a cold and beautiful face immediately appeared in his mind. So it's her. Although it was unexpected, everything was within his expectations. In this world, only Marshal would accompany Tang Zheng in his unbridled madness. All right, then let's talk about the reason for your call. Su Yingtian took a deep breath and asked, "What do you know about the island nation's imperial tutor?" Tang Zheng asked directly. Island nation's imperial tutor? Su Yingtian's voice slightly changed. Why did you think of asking him? Tang Zheng heard this and his heart moved. Since Su Yingtian said this, it meant that he definitely knew something, so he said, I am looking for him to ask about an important matter. What is it? Su Yingtian said. Since it was related to Marshal Monarch Mountain, Tang Zheng did not want to make it public, so he said, it's not convenient to say the specific reason, but this time, I want to ask you for a favor. At this point, Su Yingtian cleverly chose not to ask any more questions and directly said, the imperial tutor is a special existence in the island nation, and this name has been passed down for a long time. It does not belong to any one person, but belongs to the imperial tutor manor. Every generation of the imperial tutor manor's master will inherit the title of imperial tutor. Of course, the imperial tutor is too mysterious. Most people, and even many martial artists, do not know of his existence. The imperial tutor manor and the imperial family complement each other. Many times, the imperial family has to humbly ask for advice or help from the imperial tutor manor. The imperial tutor manor does not take orders from the imperial family, so the two are on equal footing. Tang Zheng was surprised. Su Yingtian actually knew so much about the imperial tutor, especially the existence of the imperial tutor's residence. Tang Zheng was very surprised. Island Nation actually had such a mysterious organization, just like the Azure Dragon Palace in Huaxia. Of course, there was a difference between the Imperial Advisor's residence and the Azure Dragon Palace. This was because there was no news of the Azure Dragon Palace influencing the political situation of the country. However, the Imperial Advisor's residence had such a strong influence on the royal family. Perhaps this was the result of the difference between the two countries' national conditions. Now that you've captured the Heavenly Emperor, the Imperial Advisor's residence will definitely not sit idly by. Su Yingtian added. Tang Zheng frowned and said, that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted to find the Imperial Advisor's residence, but they didn't respond at all. Now that the island nation is in such a big mess, the Imperial Advisor's residence didn't even let out a fart. The Imperial Advisor's residence is a hidden line, so of course they won't surface so easily. I dare to conclude that they are definitely looking for you everywhere. Su Yingtian retorted. Tang Zheng muttered to himself for a moment, then said, then wouldn't I have to purposely leak my whereabouts? Speaking of which, I really admire you. I really don't know how you escaped the other party's inescapable net. Su Yingtian sighed. This kind of skill was simply heaven-defying. Even though he was experienced and knowledgeable, he never thought that Tang Zheng would use illusion techniques to change his appearance and deceive the world. If you want the Imperial Advisor's residence to find you, then you must be fully prepared beforehand, because what awaits you will definitely be a fatal attack like a storm. Su Yingtian warned. Understood. Tang Zheng understood clearly. Let me ask again, what is the Imperial Advisor's realm? Of course he is in the Master Realm. As for the level of the Master Realm, there is no accurate information on this, but one thing is certain, the Imperial Advisors of the past generations are the #1 masters of the island nation. Su Yingtian said in a deep voice. Tang Zheng's head slightly sank, and he felt that this matter was getting more and more troublesome. However, even if it was troublesome, he still had to deal with it. He couldn't give up halfway. You don't want to say what is the reason for such a big mess, but I still want to tell you, take care of yourself. Where there is life, there is hope. Everything must be done with the premise of protecting your life. You have great potential for development, so you can't let anything happen to you in a foreign country. Su Yingtian advised earnestly. Although Tang Zheng had caused such a big disturbance, he still cared about him from the bottom of his heart. Thank you. Tang Zheng could feel his sincerity. If my special identity brings any adverse effects to you or the country, you have to bear with it. Tang Zheng knew very well that his identity was too special. He was a Huaxia person, and also a member of the National Security Bureau, which meant that he had an official background. In the island nation, he had attacked the warship, kidnapped the emperor, and destroyed the imperial palace. No matter what it was shocking enough to make the island nation gnash their teeth. If the island nation investigated Huaxia's officials, Huaxia would indeed be in a passive situation. Su Yingtian understood and said, "Don't worry, I am destined to deal with this kind of situation. Moreover, Huaxia is no longer the weak Huaxia of decades ago. Today, whoever wants to use force against Huaxia will have to think twice before doing so." Hearing this, Tang Zheng was slightly relieved. Suddenly, he remembered something and said, "Li Palace's holy maiden Li Xiaotian said that the island nation's emperor has a very serious hidden illness. This news is most likely true. Although I have caught the emperor, I have not found out what illness he has. His body is very healthy, even healthier than the average person. It is very strange." Su Yingtian obviously did not know about this news. Hearing this, he was stunned for a moment and said, "You are saying that the island nation's emperor has a hidden illness? I have never heard of this matter. Since you say it is true, I will immediately send people to investigate. If this information is handled properly, it will definitely be of great use." Su Yingtian was pleasantly surprised and continued, "But what does this have to do with Li Xiaotian? Li Xiaotian has come to the island nation. Moreover, there is something fishy between the Li Palace and the island nation's imperial family. You must be careful." Tang Zheng also did not understand the relationship between the Li Palace and the island nation's imperial family. But for Li Xiaotian to appear here at this time, it was definitely not normal. Su Yingtian's voice also became low as he said in a serious tone, "Thank you for this news. The three large organizations have always been the main targets of the government. If they are really colluding with the island nation's imperial family to harm the country and its people, we will definitely not sit by and do nothing. This country cannot allow a few organizations to stir up trouble. Also, if you have any further information about the emperor's hidden illness, please immediately inform me." "No problem." Tang Zheng hung up the phone and walked in front of the emperor. The emperor's eyes were wide open as he stared straight at Tang Zheng. "It's useless for you to stare at me like this. I've always wanted to use you as bait to fish out the imperial tutor, but I didn't expect that we would hide too well, so he couldn't find us. Since that's the case, I'll take the initiative to appear and use you to fish out the big fish," Tang Zheng said to the emperor. The emperor said hatefully, "If you dare to have any ideas about the imperial tutor, you will definitely die." Is that so? Then we'll wait and see." Tang Zheng smiled mysteriously and left the room. Wu chased after him and asked in a low voice, "What do you want to do?" "You guys continue to stay in the hotel. I'll take a look around the imperial palace and send them a message. The imperial tutor's mansion will definitely hear the news and move." Tang Zheng's eyes flashed with a bright light as he said mysteriously. Wu's heart skipped a beat. He had already guessed his method and warned, "Be careful, I'll wait for you to come back." Without a doubt, Tang Zheng going to the imperial palace was a very dangerous action, especially his method. When he arrived outside the imperial palace and saw the combination of light and darkness, he understood that his decision was indeed very risky. However, he had to give it a try even if it was risky. Otherwise, it would be very troublesome for the enemy to not be able to find him. Looking at the messy Kokyo from afar, the corner of Tang Zheng's mouth curled up into a smile as he muttered to himself, "Back then, I wanted to burn it. My dream has come true. This scene is truly beautiful." After saying that, he swaggered towards the ruins of the imperial palace. When he walked out of the shadow of the street corner, his face had already undergone a tremendous change. He no longer had the face of a Westerner, but had instead returned to his original appearance. When he walked across the street and arrived in front of the ruins of the imperial palace, the people who were cleaning up the ruins did not notice him. However, Tang Zheng already felt that he was being stared at by countless pairs of eyes in an instant. This was like a pack of wolves staring at their prey, and a sense of danger arose spontaneously. He walked in a circle in front of the ruins as if nothing had happened. Then he turned a corner and walked toward another street. He immediately felt that someone was following him. He did not turn around and calmly strolled down the street. On the bustling street, pedestrians came and went, shuttling back and forth endlessly. Unknowingly, the number of pedestrians on both sides of the street gradually decreased. It turned out that many people had appeared out of nowhere and separated the pedestrians to the side. The area around Tangzheng became a vacuum. The number of pedestrians on the street also decreased as they were being cleared away. Tangzheng saw all of this, but he did not care at all, and continued to do his own thing. Suddenly, a group of people walked towards Tangzheng in a fan-shaped formation. Their expressions were solemn, and there were even sparks of hatred flickering in their eyes. Tangzheng smiled faintly and whispered, "Are you finally going to make a move?" The two sides approached each other. Tangzheng was surrounded, and enemies were eyeing him covetously from all directions. Tangzheng stopped, crossed his arms, and said, "Who are the people from the Imperial Advisor's residence?" He believed that the people from the Imperial Advisor's residence must be mixed in with these people. The crowd was silent, and many of them even revealed looks of doubt. It was obvious that to them, the three words Imperial Advisor's residence were also very unfamiliar. Bring a message to the Imperial Advisor. If you want the Sky Emperor to live, then tell me the information I want. As for what information, he should be very clear about it. Otherwise, the situation will continue to worsen. Tangzheng said indifferently. Still no one answered. The atmosphere was oppressive and austere. "All right, I'm done. I'm leaving." With that, the heaven-shocking bow and the sun-shooting arrow appeared in Tangzheng's hands. Buzz! An arrow flew out, causing the air to surge and blood to splatter everywhere. The people in front of him fell down one after another. Tangzheng shrunk the ground into an inch, followed closely behind the sun-shooting arrow, and quickly passed through the crowd. Before the others could gather, Tangzheng had already rushed out of the encirclement. Chapter 671. Tangzheng rushed out of the encirclement and left the crowd far behind. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared from the street, leaving behind a group of island nation people staring at each other helplessly. Tangzheng had already changed his appearance and blended into the crowd. He walked towards the hotel without leaving a trace. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and abruptly turned his head to look behind him. The crowd that was moving like shuttles were all unfamiliar faces, and there was nothing unusual about them. He frowned and muttered in his heart. Why do I feel like someone is following me? With his strength, he was still being silently followed by someone. That person's strength must be very terrifying. Just now, there was no one with a particularly high cultivation in that group. It was easy for me to get rid of them. Why do I feel like I'm being followed? It was precisely because he saw that although the enemy had a lot of people, their individual cultivation was not high. That was why he showed himself without any fear. He had never thought that his flawless plan would also have a mishap. Although he did not see the person following him, he believed in his intuition. He was definitely being followed. Since that was the case, he could not continue to go to the hotel. He quietly turned into another street. The feeling of being followed had not disappeared. 5 Because humph, I want to see who you are. Could it be the state preceptor? He immediately rejected this idea. If the other party was really the state preceptor, he would have already made his move. Why would he need to sneakily follow him? The pedestrians on both sides of the street gradually decreased. The streets became more and more remote. The buildings became lower and lower. The fox has finally revealed his tail. Tangzheng's eyes flashed. Although he did not turn around, he could clearly feel that someone was following him. If not for his superior perception, he would definitely not feel the existence of this person. The other party was like air. Finally, Tangzheng stopped and slowly turned around. The other party did not hide, because this was a very spacious place. There was nowhere to hide. This person looked at Tangzheng calmly. Their eyes met. No one moved. They just looked at each other quietly. Tang Jing's eyes flashed with surprise. This was another woman, a beautiful woman. Moreover, the expression between her brows was extremely cold. Are you from the Imperial Advisor's residence? Tang Jing broke the silence and asked. Tang Jing, you also know ninjutsu. The other party didn't answer the question, but said indifferently. Tang Jing curled his lips in disdain and said, ninjutsu. As soon as he finished speaking, his face changed and returned to his original appearance. Ninjutsu is just a small trick. Let me tell you, this is Huaxia's genjutsu, the ancestor of your ninjutsu. Her face turned ashen as she said, how dare you? Are all Huaxia people so arrogant? Tang Jing was so angry that he laughed. You still have the nerve to say that we're arrogant and conceited? I think you're the frogs at the bottom of the well. You think you're the best in the world after learning a little bit of magic? The ignorant are fearless. If it was an ordinary person, they would certainly be in awe of the magic of ninjutsu. But Tang Jing was a cultivator and had seen too many powerful magic. He knew that Huaxia's magic was extensive and profound. Island Nation's ninjutsu was not even worthy to carry the shoes of Huaxia's magic. Island Nation people were wishful thinking that ninjutsu was amazing and treated it as a treasure. In Tang Jing's eyes, it was ridiculous. You dare to insult ninjutsu. I promise you, you will see what real ninjutsu is, and in the end, you will die on this land. Is that so? Then I'll wait and see. Tang Jing shrugged and said disapprovingly. Immediately, the other party was driven mad with anger. Since you're from the Imperial Advisor's residence, then you're not a nobody. Tell me your name. Otherwise, if you lose your life, you won't have this opportunity. The other party said. Of course I'm not like you who hides the head and shows the tail. Remember, my name is Junko. Tang Jing faintly smiled and said, your name is quite good. As the saying goes, beautiful women are destined to have a short life. As his voice fell, Tang Jing walked towards Junko. Just a small step, and he was already in front of Junko. Junko had seen this magical distance shrinking technique before, so she had been waiting for it, and was secretly on guard. When Tang Jing raised his leg, she reacted. Her hands quickly formed a seal. Whoosh. The air shook and she unexpectedly disappeared in front of Tang Jing. Ha! Tang Jing could not help but exclaim. Although this Junko was young, she was not a fake. Her ninjutsu had actually reached such a level. However, this was not the first time that Tang Jing had seen this kind of ninjutsu. The emperor's younger brother also used this kind of ninjutsu, and was finally defeated by Tang Jing. Junko's cultivation was even weaker than the emperor's younger brother. In front of Tang Jing, it was like Guan Yu playing with a knife. He did not even use war spirit. Instead, he used a pair of thin hands to cut the void in front of him. Whoosh! A strong wind blew and the air shook. Junko's figure appeared again. Tang Jing's hand had already reached her chest. She hurriedly blocked with both hands. Bang! Both of her hands were struck by Tang Jing's hand, causing her to fall back and fiercely hit her chest. Even her chest was flattened. Puff! She spat out a mouthful of blood. Her eyes flashed with shock and pain. With a muffled groan, she quickly retreated. Tang Jing stood with his hands behind his back. He did not continue to pursue. Instead, he calmly said, "You are not my opponent. If you continue to fight with me, you will die without a doubt. Even if you kill me, you can forget about making me surrender." Junko angrily stared at him, and said with a sonorous voice, "Killing you is too easy. Since you have chased me, then I will let you pass a message to the Imperial Advisor's residence. Tell me the details of the warship bombarding the island. Perhaps the Emperor will have a chance to live. Otherwise, I don't mind letting the people of the island nation watch their Emperor disappear from this world." Junko's expression changed. "You are so unbridled. There will definitely be no good result. You will die miserably. You don't have to worry about this. Pass my message. I want to know the answer tomorrow. At that time, you will come here alone with the answer. If you dare to play any tricks, the consequences will be very serious." With that said, Tang Jing flashed backwards and disappeared from Junko's line of sight at lightning speed. Junko wanted to chase after him, but stopped in her tracks. She knew that she was not his opponent. Previously, when she heard Li Xiaotian talking about this person's strength, She didn't believe it. But after seeing it with her own eyes, she understood the gap between them. She was known as the #1 genius of the island nation. Her master, the imperial advisor, once asserted that her achievements in the future would even surpass him. So, from childhood to adulthood, she wore the halo of a genius. Gradually, she adapted to everyone's eyes and the treatment of a genius. But now, she was defeated without any preparation. The halo of a genius instantly dimmed, and one could imagine her mood. She stood on the street and looked at the direction where Tang Zheng disappeared in silence for a long time. After an unknown period of time, she leisurely turned around and strode away. There were green hills and clear waters. Next to a gurgling stream, there were houses in groups of 3 to 5. It looked like a small village. It was quiet and strange, giving a feeling of a paradise. Especially this place was located near Tokyo, which made it even more precious. But strangely, no stranger discovered this paradise. The people walking around nodded and greeted each other. Apparently, they were very familiar with this place. As soon as Junko stepped into this place, someone immediately stopped and respectfully saluted her. Junko returned the salute for the first time, which made everyone curious. In the past, when someone saluted her, she would proudly leave without showing any kindness. There must be a demon behind this. Everyone looked at Junko with suspicion. This genius of the Imperial Advisor's residence. Yes, this was the legendary and mysterious Imperial Advisor's residence. No one would have thought that the famous Imperial Advisor's residence would be an ancient village. It didn't have the majesty of an Imperial Advisor's residence. But the people walking around showed that this place was different. Everyone's footsteps were very brisk, like a gust of wind. Their movements were elegant, exuding a different kind of charm. Junko walked into the depths of the village. A moment later, she arrived in front of a wooden house. This wooden house was even smaller than the other houses. It was particularly inconspicuous, especially the holes in the wall, which made the wooden house look a bit dilapidated. When Junko approached the wooden door, she respectfully stopped. The various expressions on her face completely disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a tranquil tranquility. Imperial Advisor. Junko softly called in island nation language. The wooden door didn't respond, as if there was no one inside. After a long while, an old voice came from the wooden house. Junko, you are impetuous. Go to the sword forest and meditate for half a day. Junko didn't have the slightest dissatisfaction. She deeply bowed and said, yes. She turned and left the wooden house. The wooden house was the same as before. It didn't have the slightest domineering aura, but it made people deeply feel the difference. Junko strolled to the deepest part of the village. It was a bamboo forest, which was an extremely important place in the Imperial Advisor's residence. The sword forest was the place where the disciples of the Imperial Advisor's residence practiced their swordsmanship. But not everyone could come here to practice their swordsmanship. Ordinary disciples could only practice their swordsmanship mechanically by the stream over and over again. Only those who had reached the great Tao of swordsmanship were qualified to come here to practice their swordsmanship and comprehend the essence of swordsmanship. It was said that all the Imperial Advisors had comprehended the great Tao of swordsmanship in the sword forest. There were too many magical places in this bamboo forest. What one could obtain was entirely dependent on one's luck. It wasn't Junko's first time in the sword forest. The moment she stepped into the sword forest, although the scenery in all directions didn't change at all, her entire person had changed. Looking up, these green bamboos were no longer green bamboos. Instead, they had turned into long swords. The long swords stood in great numbers, giving people a sense of awe-inspiring mystery. Chapter 672. Junko's speed was very fast, like a bolt of lightning shuttling through the forest of swords, and the wind blew the bamboos. She didn't have a sword in her hand, but her fingers quickly formed a series of hand seals. Every time she formed a hand seal, the air would vibrate, as if there was a mysterious power contained within the hand seal. These hand seals were very important in ninjutsu, and they were the source of power. This was the experience accumulated by countless ancestors. As long as a hand seal was formed, the corresponding ninjutsu would be activated. This was very different from the magic of Huaxia. It was derived from the island nation after learning the basics of magic. When ninjutsu was practiced to the extreme, these hand seals didn't necessarily need to be formed with both hands. With a move of the mind, the ninjutsu would naturally be activated. This was much faster and more powerful than the hand seals he made. Junko's cultivation hadn't reached that level yet, but her fingers were flying and forming hand seals was very fast. These hand seals were kendo hand seals. Although there was no sword, a trace of sword energy had already spread in the air. All of a sudden, she stopped in her tracks and pushed her hands forward. Vast and mighty sword chi surged forward like an avalanche. Pa pa pa. Angle the bamboo bent backward and almost fell to the ground, but it didn't break. It seemed to be very resilient. As soon as the sword energy passed, the bamboo bounced back and pierced the sky. Kacha. The sound of silk tearing suddenly sounded, which was particularly eye-catching in this silent forest of swords. Junko's face changed slightly, and her eyes locked on a bamboo not far away. A crack appeared on the bamboo, and then the crack spread in all directions at a speed visible to the naked eye. In an instant, the bamboo was full of cracks. Junko's eyes flashed with ecstasy and expectation, as if something good was about to happen. Whoosh, a breeze blew through the forest of swords, and the bamboo leaves rustled. As for the bamboo that was full of cracks, it broke into pieces and turned into powder that drifted in the air. In the blink of an eye, the bamboo that pierced the sky disappeared. Junko didn't move, and she stared at the smoke with a strange look in her eyes. The smoke dissipated, and a ray of light lit up. Junko's breathing became rapid, and without blinking, she walked step by step toward the light. Finally, this ray of light revealed its true appearance. It was a sword, green all over, and it was like a pool of autumn water, rippling with a mysterious aura. Junko stood in front of the sword and stared at it with burning eyes, muttering to herself, "The sword forest finally gave me a sword." The sword forest gave a sword. This was the dream of the Imperial Preceptor's disciples. Only when their cultivation reached a certain level would the sword forest give a sword. This was an independent behavior of the sword forest, and even the Imperial Preceptor couldn't change it. From this point, one could also see the magic of the forest. Junko's hands trembled as she reached out and grabbed the hilt. She subconsciously closed her eyes, as if she was carefully perceiving the sword. Clang! The long sword was lifted up high by Junko. The setting sun sprinkled down from the sky, and the mottled light reflected off the sword, rippling with a mysterious and powerful aura. Junko sighed in her heart. She had been cultivating for so long and had been looking forward to this day, but she hadn't had a breakthrough. She didn't expect to gain so much after fighting with Tangjung this time. She couldn't help but think of that delicate face. With a complicated expression, she sighed, "Should I thank him?" Humph. In the next second, she rejected this ridiculous idea. This was her own contribution over a long period of time. What did it have to do with that person? Since her cultivation had improved by leaps and bounds and the sword forest had given her a sword, the next time she met Tangjung, the outcome would be uncertain. She was full of confidence and excitement. She took a deep look at the sword forest and strode out of the forest. While strolling in the village, pairs of surprised eyes were fixed on the long sword in her hand. Many people reacted, and their eyes were filled with envy. Junko walked in front of the crowd with a calm expression. Suddenly, a person walked in front of her and blocked her way. Li Xiaotian looked at Junko with a complicated expression and said, "Is the sword forest really so magical? Your cultivation has improved greatly after going in." Junko looked at her indifferently and didn't say a word. "I really want to go to your sword forest and experience it once," Li Xiaotian said enviously. Junko's expression turned cold, and she warned, "The sword forest is an important place in the Imperial Preceptor's residence. Unauthorized people are not allowed to enter, let alone an outsider like you. If you dare to have any ideas about the sword forest, I advise you to give up." Junko was very curious about Li Xiaotian. Back then, the Imperial Preceptor asked her to bring Li Xiaotian back. The two of them talked for a long time behind closed doors, and even Junko didn't know what they talked about. This added a mysterious aura to Li Xiaotian's body. In the past few days, Li Xiaotian had been staying in the village like a transcendent existence. It was unknown why she continued to stay here. Junko instinctively resisted Li Xiaotian. Perhaps it was because they were both women, especially beautiful women, and they didn't get along well with each other. However, due to the Imperial Preceptor's orders, she didn't dare to do anything to Li Xiaotian. Li Xiaotian didn't care about Junko's warning. Instead, she looked at the sword forest from afar, and her eyes kept changing. No one knew what she was thinking. Have you found Tang Zheng? Li Xiaotian retracted her gaze and asked. Junko hesitated for a moment and said, he showed up today. Li Xiaotian raised his eyebrows and said, oh, then he should be the one who showed up on his own. And not you who found him, right? Junko's eyes flashed with a strange color. Li Xiaotian had guessed correctly. Li Xiaotian wasn't surprised at all and said with a smile, Tang Zheng is very cunning. If he really wants to hide, I'm afraid there aren't many people in this world who can find him. However, I don't think he can hide forever. If he has a request, then of course he will have to show up. Junko stared straight at Li Xiaotian and asked, you know his purpose? Of course, he has the emperor in his hands. Of course you won't refuse to use the emperor's life in exchange for the truth of the island incident. Li Xiaotian said. Junko couldn't laugh anymore. She coldly snorted and turned to walk toward the cabin. Li Xiaotian chuckled twice and followed closely behind him. What are you doing? Junko stopped in front of the cabin and stared at Li Xiaotian. Li Xiaotian didn't move and said with a smile, I want to see the Imperial Preceptor, so of course I have to come here. Do you think you can see the Imperial Preceptor as you wish? Junko angrily said. Even the Emperor couldn't see the Imperial Preceptor as he wished. What ability did this outsider have to say that he wanted to see the Imperial Preceptor? Did he think this was his family's land? Li Xiaotian didn't get angry and lightly said, the Imperial Preceptor has the final say. Your words can't make the decision. After that, he pushed the wooden door. Junko wanted to stop him, but an old voice jumped out from the crack of the door. Junko, invite the guest in. Junko's movement immediately froze. Her face slightly changed and she had to stop her attack. Squeak. The wooden door automatically opened. Li Xiaotian walked in, and the light immediately dimmed. Only the faint light outside the window and outside the door shone into the cabin, allowing people to vaguely recognize the surrounding environment. Although it was the second time he came in, Li Xiaotian still felt his heart being fiercely squeezed, and a sense of suffocation hit him in the face. This wooden house wasn't very big, especially after seeing the situation inside. He felt that the wooden house was very small. There was very little furniture in the cabin. There was only a table and a bed. It was very simple. Of course, there was a reason for this. It was because there wasn't enough space in the cabin. Most of the cabin was occupied by a large pit. There was a large pit in the middle of the cabin. It was filled with swords, like a pool of swords. This large pit was the sword pool. It was a relic left behind by the Imperial Preceptor. It was another important place in the Imperial Preceptor's residence besides the sword forest. However, the sword pool was guarded by the Imperial Preceptor. No one was allowed to approach it without permission. Li Xiaotian couldn't help but look at the sword pool. Even though he had seen it once, when he saw it again, he still felt a kind of austere aura coming from it. This sword pool was very famous, even more famous than the sword forest. It was because of the masters of these swords. The masters of these swords were all experts of their generation, especially sword experts. These people came to challenge the master of the Imperial Preceptor's residence, the Imperial Preceptor. However, time after time, it was proven that their challenge was ridiculous and laughable. Compared to the Imperial Preceptor, they couldn't withstand a single blow and were not worth mentioning. It was precisely because they lost to the Imperial Preceptor that their swords were left in the sword pool. After accumulating for a long time, the sword pool became what it was today. Junko followed Li Xiaotian's gaze and looked at the sword pool. She snorted coldly as if to remind Li Xiaotian not to let his imagination run wild. Of course, there were many precious divine weapons in the sword pool. Even after so many years, the quality and power of these weapons were definitely not bad. It was a coincidence for an ordinary person to obtain a divine weapon. However, there were so many divine weapons that were covered in dust. It couldn't help but sigh. If one could take away one of the swords, its power would definitely increase greatly after leaving the sword pool. However, the Imperial Preceptor's residents had never done so. They had always kept the sword pool as a place for their disciples to visit. Li Xiaotian shifted his gaze slightly and looked at the darkness behind the sword pool. In the darkness, a person was quietly sitting cross-legged. His face couldn't be seen clearly, but he seemed to be very thin and small. He sat quietly on the chair with his head lowered. Li Xiaotian already knew that this person was the famous Imperial Preceptor. He didn't dare to be the slightest bit arrogant, and cupped his hands in greeting. Chapter 673. State Teacher's words of congratulations made Junko ecstatic. She quickly bowed and said, "Everything is thanks to State Teacher." State Teacher shook his head and said, "This is the result of your hard work and luck. This sword is like autumn water. Why don't you call it autumn water sword?" Junko excitedly said, "Thank you, State Teacher, for the name." She subconsciously stroked the sword. From now on, this sword will be called Autumn Water. State Teacher nodded with gratification. Then he turned to Li Xiaotian and asked, "Miss Xiaotian, why are you looking for me?" "State Teacher, I heard from Junko that she found Tang Zheng's whereabouts. So I came to inquire," Li Xiaotian said. The Imperial Tutor looked at Junko without batting an eyelid. Junko understood and said, "Reporting to the Imperial Tutor, Tang Zheng took the initiative to appear outside the Imperial residence. We couldn't capture him. He is a cultivator. His cultivation is high. How could he be captured alive so easily?" The Imperial Tutor said dismissively. "Since he has appeared, there must be something else. State Teacher has a divine foresight. He asked me to pass a few words to you," Junko said while looking at Li Xiaotian. Li Xiaotian was unmoved. He didn't have any intention to avoid suspicion. Instead, he waited for her to speak with interest. Seeing that the State Preceptor had no objection, Junko suppressed the displeasure in her heart and truthfully repeated Tang Zheng's words. State Teacher heard this but didn't get angry. Instead, he looked at Li Xiaotian and said, "This person really hasn't given up. He wants to know the answer to the island." "Actually, I also want to know the answer," Li Xiaotian said with a smile. State Teacher chuckled and said, "The inside story of this matter is too complicated. It's better to know less." Li Xiaotian was unmoved and calmly said, "I am a very curious person. I want to know more." Is that so?" State Teacher gave a meaningful laugh. Suddenly his tone changed as he said, "I can tell you the truth. The people on that island have all been imprisoned." "Imprisoned?" Li Xiaotian's expression changed greatly. Since Wu Junshan and the others were living on the island, they must be extremely powerful, even terrifying. Who in this world could imprison them? Li Xiaotian felt that all of this was inconceivable. If it was someone else who said this, she would definitely think that it was a fantasy story, and that the other party was lying to her. However, since it came from the Grand Tutor's mouth, there was no doubt about it. Yes, those people are a huge threat, not only to the island nation, but also to the martial artists of Huaxia. So someone told me this news, and then I thought of a way to imprison them," the Imperial Advisor said lightly. Li Xiaotian's face stiffened. He seemed to have thought of a possibility and asked tentatively, "Who told you this news?" "Then who told you to come to the island nation?" State Teacher didn't answer and asked back. Li Xiaotian was startled and blurted out, "Palace Master." State Teacher chuckled and didn't say anything else. Li Xiaotian was shocked. She didn't expect that all of this was controlled by the Palace Master, especially the whereabouts of Wu Junshan and the others. Even she didn't know about it, but the Palace Master knew about it, and even hid it from her. This feeling of not being trusted made her very uncomfortable. Of course, she didn't doubt the authenticity of State Teacher's words, because the Palace Master didn't give her any specific orders. He only said that when the time was right, she would naturally know everything. Now that the time was right, she actually learned this news from an outsider. A feeling of being deceived arose spontaneously. Junko looked at state teacher and Li Xiaotian with mixed feelings. She didn't know the information conveyed by these words. She didn't know what state teacher was hiding from her. Of course, she didn't have the slightest anger or resentment because state teacher's image in her mind was too high and couldn't be questioned. Since he didn't say it, there must be a reason. She only needed to silently watch. Why did the palace master tell you this news? After pondering for a long time, Li Xiaotian asked. Maybe she thinks her strength is not enough to deal with those people. Nonsense. Li Xiaotian shouted. His anger gradually replaced his reverence for the imperial preceptor. Junko heard this and flew into a rage. She stood in front of Li Xiaotian and glared at him. Don't be rude to state teacher. Li Xiaotian snorted and was about to fly into a rage when state teacher said, Junko, don't worry. Miss Li, your palace master is far-sighted. She told me this news, of course there must be a deep meaning. As for what I said just now, only I have the strength to deal with those people. It's not an arrogant statement. Because the facts are the best proof. Li Xiaotian took a few deep breaths. There were more and more questions in his mind, as if they were about to rush out from the top of his head. Why did the palace master do all this? Why did she ask others to do it? Was it really like state teacher said, only he had the strength to deal with Wu Junshan and the others quietly? But she really couldn't see how state teacher was more powerful than Wu Junshan, or the palace master. State teacher must be a grandmaster. As for the level of grandmaster, Li Xiaotian certainly couldn't see, but he couldn't be so powerful that he could easily imprison Wu Junshan and the others. In short, all of this was too strange. Then where did you imprison those people? Li Xiaotian asked unwillingly. State teacher smiled mysteriously and said, You don't need to worry about that. But Tang Zheng has given an ultimatum. If you don't tell him what happened on the island, or even let those people go, the emperor will die. This kind of loss is difficult to make up for your country. State teacher laughed out loud. He wants to threaten me. I'm really curious how far he can go in the end. As he said this, state teacher silently thought in his heart. Tang Zheng is a cultivator. Just this identity alone is enough for me to capture him. He has hidden secrets that need to be unearthed. You don't want to care about the life and death of the emperor anymore? Hearing state teacher's answer, Li Xiaotian's heart was filled with doubts and asked. State teacher laughed mysteriously, but didn't answer this question. Seeing that he couldn't get any useful information, Li Xiaotian could only helplessly say, If there is any news, please let me know. With that, he turned around and walked out of the small wooden house. Looking at the gradually darkening sky, her heart was in a mess. Why did the palace master do all this? Why did he ask her to come to the island nation at this time? Was it really to treat the emperor's illness? There were too many doubts and mysteries in this. She walked in the darkness with 1 foot and 1 foot, her head in a mess. Unknowingly, she actually came to the side of the sword forest. She stopped in her tracks and raised her head to look at the dark and deep sword forest. It was as if many towering swords were erected in front of her, and a murderous aura rushed towards her. Is the sword forest really as powerful as the legends say? She had heard too many legends about the sword forest in the past few days. Although she didn't practice swordsmanship, she knew a little about it. Many of the state teacher's residence's predecessors had comprehended swordsmanship from the sword forest. This definitely showed that the sword forest was not just powerful and mysterious. The state teacher's residence is full of mysteries, and it's not a good idea for me to stay here aimlessly. Why don't I explore the sword forest, and see if I can find anything? She immediately did as she thought, and her eyes immediately became determined. Although the state teacher's residence had repeatedly ordered that outsiders were not allowed to enter the sword forest, the prideful her didn't take this order to heart. Moreover, her curiosity towards the state teacher's residence had increased greatly. It was necessary for her to find out something. When she first met the state teacher, the two of them had a long private conversation. Outsiders didn't know the content of their conversation, but in fact, there weren't many secrets that couldn't be revealed. However, there was one thing that Li Xiaotian could confirm from the conversation with the state teacher, that the palace master and the state teacher were old acquaintances. Their friendship seemed to be quite deep. Although Li Xiaotian was still a little brooding about this matter, he didn't show it. In fact, Li Xiaotian looked down on people from the island nation. This time, he was acting under orders, so he was so close to people from the island nation. However, she really didn't understand why Palace Master White, who had a high status and amazing strength, wanted to mix with the state teacher of the island nation. Humph, since you don't want to tell me the answer directly, I'll find it myself. I'll start with the Sword Forest, and dig out the secrets of the state teacher's residence. Li Xiaotian was determined and strode into the Sword Forest. The Sword Forest was pitch black, but there wasn't a trace of mosquitoes or frogs. It was eerily silent. Li Xiaotian walked in with a calm expression, and began to wander in the Sword Forest. The bright moonlight sprinkled down. There was a faint light in the Sword Forest, so it wasn't dark. The Sword Forest wasn't big. Li Xiaotian wandered around for more than 10 minutes, but he didn't find any clues. The Sword Forest was no different from an ordinary bamboo forest, but why did it become an important place of the state teacher's residence? The state teacher's residence had been passed down for so many years. How could they treat a useless bamboo forest as a treasure? This meant that the Sword Forest was definitely not as simple as it looked. She wandered around 2 more times unwillingly, but still found nothing. She was almost in despair. Maybe it's thanks to the state teacher's disciple that I had the opportunity to comprehend the swordsmanship. She shook her head helplessly and walked out of the Sword Forest dejectedly. After walking for a while, she found that there were still towering bamboos in all directions. The path she came from had disappeared. She didn't panic. Instead, she looked around with interest. There were identical bamboos all around her. There was no sense of direction or specific road signs. I'm lost. But I didn't realize how big the Sword Forest was. How could I be lost? She muttered unwillingly. She was never one to admit defeat easily. Since she was lost, she would find another way. If these bamboos were in her way, she didn't mind chopping down the bamboos to clear a path. There's something strange about the Sword Forest. She stopped in her tracks. She knew that running around like a headless fly would definitely cause problems. She looked into the distance, and all she could see were tall green bamboos. Chapter 674. Li Xiaotian was good at using bows and arrows, which was also why she had always coveted the heaven-shocking bow and the shooting sun arrows. At this moment, the arrow in her hand was not a shooting sun arrow. She only had one shooting sun arrow. And unless she had no other choice, she would definitely not use this divine armament. Well, with a release of his finger, the arrow flew out. The surging airflow stirred up the air in all directions, causing the bamboo leaves to rustle nonstop. Ding! With a crisp sound, the arrow hit a green bamboo. However, a strange scene happened. The green bamboo was undamaged. It was only bent in a large arc by the force of the bow and arrow. Then it quickly bounced back, still piercing through the sky. Li Xiaotian's pupils constricted as he looked at this scene in disbelief. This was just a green bamboo. How could it block such a powerful arrow attack? There must be a demon when things are abnormal. She felt more and more that this Sword Forest was strange. Not only did it block her path and confuse her direction, even this kind of attack was unable to harm the green bamboo in the slightest. She gradually began to believe the legends about the Sword Forest. There really was some kind of mysterious power that could not be explained clearly. A small country like this actually has such a magical place. It's strange. Li Xiaotian shook her head. She was very puzzled. So what if it's magical? I don't believe that a living person like me will be trapped in this bamboo forest to death. Li Xiaotian's prideful nature erupted. How could she admit defeat to the bamboo forest? Wouldn't that make people laugh their heads off? Thus, she took a deep breath and pulled the bowstring again. Waves of inner strength passed through her arm and into the bowstring. The bowstring was pulled into a full moon, and the arrowhead shone with a cold light under the moonlight. Swoosh! The arrow left the line, and the air seemed to be torn apart, producing a sharp sound of breaking through the air. Boom! A green bamboo was hit once again, and the berserk force directly pressed it to the ground. I think you're still going on like this. Li Xiaotian's eyes revealed a trace of complacency. However, in the next second, Her face froze. Her eyes were wide open as she stared straight at the green bamboo. The bamboo that had fallen to the ground just now bounced back, as if nothing had happened. It was still proud and straight. Li Xiaotian was dumbfounded. He had never seen or heard of such a situation before. Was this still an ordinary green bamboo? She quickly stroked the bamboo pole beside her, but there was nothing strange. Wasn't this just ordinary bamboo? But since when did bamboo have such a strong ability to withstand attacks? What the devil? What the devil? She couldn't help but exclaim. She looked up at the bright moon hanging high in the sky. Although she was very unwilling, she had to admit that she was trapped in this forest of swords. Inside the wooden hut, the Imperial Preceptor and Junko were talking. The Imperial Preceptor was still hidden in the darkness, and his face couldn't be seen clearly. However, his thin and small body made people feel an inexplicable pressure. Junko had long since gotten used to this kind of aura and pressure. She even felt a sense of familiarity. The two of them chatted as time slowly passed. Junko spent most of her time listening and comprehending the Imperial Preceptor's profound meaning and instructions. When the Imperial Preceptor finally stopped, Junko asked, "Imperial Preceptor, are we really going to do this? Those people are imprisoned, and even I can't release them. Therefore, this matter is no longer under my control. This is the only feasible way," the Imperial Preceptor said somewhat vexedly. Although Junko was surprised that the Imperial Preceptor said that even he couldn't control this matter, she didn't ask further. Since the Imperial Preceptor didn't say anything, she naturally wouldn't ask. This was a habit cultivated over many years. However, she still frowned and said worriedly, "But if we do this, then this matter will really blow up and we might even suffer heavy losses. There will be losses in everything. We just have to think of a way to remedy it," the Imperial Preceptor said disapprovingly. Junko wanted to say something but hesitated. But in the end, she swallowed her words. Since the Imperial Preceptor had already made a decision, then she should wholeheartedly carry it out. There was no room for negotiation. "Yes, Junko understands." Junko nodded in acknowledgement. Suddenly, the Imperial Preceptor exclaimed in surprise. His voice became somewhat cold. "Someone has broken into the Forest of Swords. Who is so bold?" Junko glared and flew into a rage. The Forest of Swords was an important place in the Imperial Preceptor's residence. For so many years, no one had ever dared to trespass into the Forest of Swords. Suddenly, her heart stirred as she remembered that familiar face. She said angrily, "Is it Li Xiaotian?" The Imperial Preceptor said calmly, "It's most likely her. Go and bring her out, otherwise she will definitely be trapped in the Forest of Swords." "Serves her right. She only has herself to blame," Junko said with a murderous look. "Bring her out," the Imperial Preceptor repeated. Junko's angry words were immediately swallowed back. The Imperial Preceptor had already repeated the order. If she dared to talk nonsense, then the consequences would be very serious. Junko left the cabin, leaving the Imperial Preceptor alone. He quietly hid in the darkness and muttered to himself, "Li Palace, I'm afraid you didn't expect to send me such a big gift like Tangzheng. As long as I have him, many of Huaxia's long-lost techniques will be able to see the light of day again. As long as I learn these techniques, I will be able to perfect my ninjutsu and bring it to a new peak. Completely surpassing Huaxia's techniques will be just around the corner. At that time, the empire will rise again in the forest of the world. Huaxia and other countries will crawl under our feet, allowing the empire to complete the unfinished business of our ancestors." His words gradually revealed a sense of madness. It made people tremble in fear. Li Xiaotian had already used all of her skills, but she still couldn't break out of this forest of swords. Her martial arts were like scratching an itch, unable to hurt the slightest bit of the forest of swords. Could it be that they really want to force me to use the shooting sun arrows? She touched the shooting sun arrows that she always carried on her back. The shooting sun arrows were divine weapons. They couldn't be easily shown to others, so as to avoid attracting the disaster of killing monks. But now that she was trapped in this damned forest, she was so angry that she was ready to use the shooting sun arrows. She didn't believe that these cabinets could withstand the power of the shooting sun arrows. It must be known that the shooting sun arrows were used to shoot down the sun. Just as she was about to make up her mind, a person's figure became clear under the moonlight. It gradually approached and finally arrived in front of Li Xiaotian. Junko looked at Li Xiaotian with an unkind expression and said coldly, "You trespassed into the forest of swords. That is a capital offense." Li Xiaotian was unmoved and said indifferently, "Then are you here to kill me?" "Humph, the state teacher is merciful and has given you a way out. If you dare to run amok again, then I guarantee you will regret it." Junko's killing intent soared. With her temper, she really wanted to kill Li Xiaotian on the spot. But she didn't dare to disobey the state teacher's orders. Li Xiaotian shrugged and smiled indifferently. She strode in the direction Junko came from, and left the forest of swords in a short while. Junko followed behind her step by step, monitoring her and preventing her from causing any trouble. Li Xiaotian quietly returned to her room. Junko stood outside for a long time before turning around and leaving. Li Xiaotian lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling with her eyes wide open. Hundreds of thoughts ran through her mind. The state teacher's residence is more mysterious than I expected. Especially in the Forest of Swords, the strangeness and mystery is far beyond my imagination. I must get to the bottom of it. These years, although the island nation and Huaxia coexisted peacefully, a dog can't stop itself from eating shit. This is a truth that has been proven for thousands of years. If the island nation continues to grow stronger, they will definitely rise again and stir up more storms. Li Xiaotian's understanding was clear and deep. She didn't really treat the state teacher's residence as a little sheep just because of their temporary close relationship. The island nation was like a poisonous snake, always waiting for an opportunity to strike. As long as the other party was given the chance, they would take a fatal bite. After returning to the Li Palace this time, I must ask the palace master about this matter. The cooperation between the Li Palace and the state teacher's residence puzzled Li Xiaotian, and even made her somewhat dissatisfied. Her thoughts were more flexible than Junko's. Although the palace master didn't tell her the truth, she still wanted to know the ins and outs of the matter. The next day, Junko left the state teacher's residence alone, but she didn't notice that Li Xiaotian was following her from a distance. Li Xiaotian was good at hiding her tracks, so she followed from a distance to find out where Junko was going. Based on her intuition, she was sure that Junko was going on some secret operation. She had been in the state teacher's residence for a few days, but she had been doing nothing and making no progress. This made her very frightened and dissatisfied. Back then, the palace master only told her to act according to the circumstances, and didn't give her any specific arrangements. Her operation this time was more like an experience. Li Xiaotian wasn't someone who spent her days muddling along. Since she was here, she naturally had to get to the bottom of everything. Junko was as fast as a shooting star. It didn't take long for her to arrive at the place where she and Tangzheng had agreed to meet yesterday. Looking up, there was no one around. Did he go back on his words? Junko frowned. Why would I go back on my words? A voice suddenly rang in Junko's ears. She was startled and subconsciously jumped to the side, staring at him like a tiger watching its prey. She didn't know how he could appear and disappear so mysteriously. Did you bring the information I asked for? Tangzheng asked. Junko's expression was stern. I have to see the emperor first before I can tell you the information. Hehe, are you afraid that I'll lie to you? One must always be on guard against others. These are the rules of the game that I set. You have no right to bargain. Tangzheng slightly frowned and said with dissatisfaction. Then there's nothing to talk about. Junko's attitude was very firm. If I can't see the emperor, then there's nothing to talk about. You're not afraid that I'll kill him? Tangzheng said fiercely. Don't scare me. If you kill him, then you won't know anything about those people. Junko joked. Tangzheng's eyelids twitched. If that was the case, then she really did know about Wu Junshan and the others. Compared to the Mikado, he cared more about the safety of these people. Obviously, Junko was also very clear about this, so she refused to let it go. Fine, then I'll let you see the emperor. If you dare to lie to me, then I'll immediately behead him, Tang Zheng said decisively. Chapter 675. Tang Zheng gestured towards the distance, and two figures walked out from behind an obstacle. It was the martial emperor and the heavenly emperor. The heavenly emperor was in a sorry state, but when he saw Junko, his expression immediately became excited. However, he was tightly controlled by the martial emperor, and could not escape at all. He could only watch from afar. The two of them did not approach, but deliberately maintained a certain distance. Junko's eyes revealed a strange look, and said, "Let them come closer." The corner of Tang Zheng's mouth curled and he sneered. "You want to save the heavenly emperor, right? Stop dreaming, just looking from afar is enough. If you dare to push your luck, then there's nothing to talk about." How could Tang Zheng be led by the nose by the other party, and gradually took the initiative? Junko's expression changed, and she finally gritted her teeth and said, "All right, then listen carefully. The source of the news on the island is Li Palace." Li Palace. Tang Zheng's pupils suddenly constricted. Although Li Xiaoyan's appearance had already made him guess, when he personally confirmed it, he was still very shocked. Li Xiaotian was hiding far away, and could vaguely hear the conversation between the two. When she heard that Junko did not hesitate to sell out Li Palace, she was furious, and her eyes were about to spit fire. Li Xiaotian gritted her teeth in hatred. This girl from the island nation was indeed not a trustworthy person. To sell out Li Palace so cleanly. But she did not think about how she had sold out Tang Zheng back then, and almost took his life. It was truly a case of the pot calling the kettle black. As expected, it was Li Palace's doing. Li Palace's intelligence network is spread all over the world, and it is not a boast. Even this vast island could not escape their investigation. But why did they tell you this news? Because that island is closer to our country. Also, Li Palace is very clear that we have the strength to deal with those people. You have the strength? Don't lie, those people are not weak people. What qualifications do you have to say that you can deal with them? Tang Zheng did not agree, because he was very clear about the strength of Wu Junshan and the rest. Junko smiled calmly and said, "Isn't the truth the best evidence?" Tang Zheng was speechless. After a while he asked, "What did you do to them?" "Of course it's locked up." Tang Zheng was overjoyed. Since Wu Junshan and the others were not dead, it was not too late. "Where is it?" "Of course it's a very secret place. Without my guidance, outsiders wouldn't be able to find it even if they dug 3 feet into the ground," Junko said confidently. Tang Zheng glared at him. "Then aren't you afraid that I'll kill the heavenly emperor?" "Of course I am. So let's make a deal. You give me the emperor and I'll tell you the location." "That's too unfair. I haven't even seen him, and I'm handing the emperor over to you. Do you really think I'm a 3-year-old child, so easy to fool?" Tang Zheng said angrily. Junko hesitated for a moment, then said, "All right, I can hand him over to you. But you have to let the emperor come over. I want to check if he's injured. If you did something to him, then there's no need to talk about it." Tang Zheng hesitated. Just what kind of trick was this Junko playing? As if she had seen through Tang Zheng's thoughts, Junko laughed mockingly. "Your cultivation is higher than mine. Don't tell me you're afraid of me?" Tang Zheng's heart moved. The other party's strength was not as good as his. Even if he brought the emperor over for her to check, she wouldn't be able to play any tricks, let alone take him away from under his nose. "All right, if the emperor is fine, then you have to use those people to exchange for the emperor." Tang Zheng agreed. Junko smiled, tacitly agreeing to his suggestion. Tang Zheng waved his hand, and Marshall walked over with the emperor. "Is there any news?" After walking closer, Marshall asked impatiently. Tang Zheng nodded, indicating for her to calm down, and said to Junko, "Check." Junko smiled in satisfaction. She extended her hand and touched the emperor's body, as though she wanted to check if there was anything wrong with his body. Tang Zheng and Marshall were both cold. They looked at Junko without saying a word. Suddenly the emperor's face changed. He let out a heart-wrenching scream. "What are you doing?" Before he finished, Junko had already retreated. An autumn water-like sword appeared in her hand. The sword tip was still stained with blood, dripping to the ground. Junko's eyes released a biting cold killing intent. She coldly looked at the sinister-looking emperor. The others were dumbstruck at this scene. Tang Zheng, Marshall, and even Li Xiaotian, who was hiding in the shadows, all had their mouths wide open, to the point where a duck egg could be stuffed in. Damn! What the hell is going on? Why would Junko want to kill the emperor? This world is too messed up. The three of their brains were not enough. Even if they were smart, they could not figure out what was going on. Blood flowed out from the emperor's throat. His face was distorted from the pain, as though he was an evil spirit that crawled out from hell. You. So ruthless. The emperor stretched out his finger, trembling as he pointed at Junko. Gasping for breath, he spoke intermittently. You can't die. Tang Zheng shouted. He immediately supported the emperor, his fingers quickly poking his body, trying to save his life. But after a while he realized that it was all in vain. The emperor's heart had already been pierced through by the sword. His life was cut off. There was no way to save him. Why did you kill him? Isn't he your heavenly emperor? Tang Zheng roared hysterically at Junko. Without the emperor as a hostage, the whereabouts of Wu Junshan and the rest would be impossible to investigate. The other party had spent so much effort, even sacrificing the emperor, so that they would not let Tang Zheng know of this news. It could be said that they had put in a lot of effort. Hearing this, Junko was unmoved. She smiled faintly and said, "How can you guess the imperial advisor's decision?" Marshall was unable to restrain his anger. He roared, "Without the emperor, I will take you as a hostage." With that said, she disappeared from where she was and attacked Junko. Junko's left hand formed a seal, her right hand holding the sword. Her hand seals flew. The autumn water sword was immediately filled with a mysterious sword chi. Wang. Her arms suddenly shook. The autumn water sword vibrated. Waves of sword chi shot out from the autumn water sword, shooting towards Marshall. Marshall's face changed. When an expert made a move, one would know whether or not it was real. She had already determined that the opponent's sword technique was definitely not simple. Thus she bellowed. Her right hand formed a blade, and waves of blazing chi surged out from her palm. She swung it fiercely. Boom. When the sword chi was hit by the roaring flame blade, it was like a surging river meeting a stone. With Marshall's palm as the origin, the sword chi flew to both sides. The surrounding trees and flowers were all hit by the sword chi, turning into ruins. It was a complete mess. "Humph, you think you can beat me like this?" Junko sneered and swung the autumn water sword. One turned into two turned into four. In the end, 16 autumn water swords were formed. "Kill!" Junko shouted. The 16 autumn water swords shot towards Marshall with the sound of wind and thunder. All three paths were blocked by the autumn water swords. Marshall's face sank. The opponent's cultivation was high beyond her expectations. She could not accurately judge Junko's cultivation, but she was sure that she was in the Xiantian realm. From the opponent's series of attacks, it could be determined that her cultivation was not inferior to Marshall's. Seeing this, Tang Zheng was deeply shocked. When he fought with Junko yesterday, Junko's strength was far from this. This meant that her cultivation had increased by leaps and bounds overnight. Tang Zheng's eyelids twitched. The people of the imperial tutor's residence actually had such a foundation. In just one night, their cultivation could change so drastically. It seemed that the imperial tutor's residence was far more powerful than he had imagined. Seeing the autumn water swords coming at her, Marshall jumped into the air, dodging the attacks from the middle and lower paths, but the autumn water sword at the top continued to stab forward. Clang! Clang! Marshall used her hand as a blade. Flames rose into the air crackled, the roaring flame blade danced in the air, fiercely clashing with the autumn water swords. Boom! With a loud sound, the autumn water swords were annihilated, leaving only one behind, while Marshall flew back several meters before coming to a stop. Junko held her sword with one hand and stood proudly, looking at Marshall with sparks in their eyes. In this exchange, both sides were evenly matched. The one with the most complicated feelings was not the person involved, but Li Xiaotian, who was hiding in the dark. Her cultivation was on the same level as Marshall in the past, but ever since Marshall and Tang Zheng came together, they had mysteriously suppressed her. Now, even an island nation girl's cultivation was higher than hers. She really wanted to find a piece of tofu and kill herself. Her heart was fiercely hit. She had always been good at scheming, but now she realized that she was simply neglecting the essentials and chasing after the trifles. Even something as fundamental as martial arts had been abandoned. She looked from afar with a complicated expression, biting her lips, all sorts of feelings welling up in her heart. At this time, Tang Zheng realized that the emperor's head was tilted to one side. He had completely lost his life. His mood could not help but become gloomy. Junko, since the emperor is dead, then you will have to replace him as a hostage. With that, his feet flashed, and he appeared in front of Junko, stretching out his hand and grabbing towards her shoulder. Junko quickly retreated, leaving a long trail on the ground. Tang Zheng was like a shadow, his finger getting closer and closer. So, the autumn water sword danced in the air. It was like a waterfall flying through the air, stirring towards Tang Zheng's finger. Ding! Tang Zheng flicked his finger, and the autumn water sword was knocked away, his 5 fingers moving together, about to grab the opponent. But the autumn water sword welcomed it. It was like an unkillable cockroach. Tang Zheng snorted. His hand turned into a fist, and heavily smashed down. Pung! With a muffled sound, the fist fiercely landed on the autumn water sword. The sword chi rippled, and Junko turned into a shooting star, flying backwards. Tang Zheng's speed was even faster. Before she landed, he was already standing below her, ready to capture her alive. Junko was in midair, looking at Tang Zheng below. She did not despair, but her eyes became abnormally firm. Chapter 676. Tang Zheng stared intently at the complex hand seals in her hand. Initially, when she used ninjutsu, she used hand seals, and the same when she used swordsmanship. He gradually realized that this was probably a trigger mechanism of ninjutsu, which could only be used by hand seals. However, this was completely different from the emperor's younger brother he had seen before, as well as the grandmaster martial artist from a few days ago. They didn't need these complicated hand seals to use ninjutsu, and they could use it anytime and anywhere. In fact, it was not difficult to understand, and he soon figured out the reason. Perhaps Junko's cultivation was not high enough, so she couldn't use ninjutsu at will. She had to rely on these handprints to do so. His guess was right. There was a big difference between ninjutsu and Huaxia's magic. Because ninjutsu was only the tip of the iceberg, and many of the core things were not learned. But island nation people were not stupid. After generations of research, they finally found another way to remedy this problem. And that was hand seals. These complicated hand seals were created and passed down by generations of ninjutsu masters. Before a ninja breaks through to the grandmaster level, they must rely on these complicated hand seals to perform ninjutsu. Therefore, for an ordinary ninja, the speed of hand seals is directly related to the strength of their attack power and attack power. Junko was obviously one of the best among them. Her slender fingers flew, and the hand seals were completed. Seeing that she was about to fall into Tang Zheng's palm, she stretched out her hand and collided with Tang Zheng's hand. She staggered and fell to the ground. Tang Zheng's foot moved, and he approached her. His hand was like a dragon claw, reaching for her head. Suddenly she shouted, "Escape!" A strange scene appeared. She actually disappeared in front of everyone's eyes, as if she had never appeared before. Marshall and Li Xiaotian were surprised to see this scene. They originally looked down on the island nation's ninjutsu, but now it seems that they were just frogs in a well. Ninjutsu had many praiseworthy points. Wasn't this scene the best proof? Tang Zheng's face turned cold and said, "Is it another illusion? Let's see where you can hide." Tang Zheng urged his zhenqi and crazily circulated it. He sensed the fluctuation in the air. Gradually his brows wrinkled. There was no fluctuation. Did she really disappear? How was this possible? How could it disappear so quickly? Even Tang Zheng's earth-shrinking technique was unable to do so. Strange. She had called out escape just now. Could this be the legendary escape technique? Tang Zheng had heard of this technique from the Heaven Monk before. In fact, the shrinking earth into an inch was the embryonic form of this escape technique, but the escape technique was even more mystical, and its speed was even faster than the shrinking earth into an inch. However, escape techniques required a certain medium. They were divided into earth escape, golden shield, water escape, and wood escape. This time Junko used the earth escape. Using the soil on the ground as a medium, she escaped in an instant. I was too careless. I didn't think that she would know ninjutsu. I really underestimated ninjutsu. Tangjung blamed himself. Since Junko had escaped, it was impossible to find her. No wonder she was fearless and dared to come to see him alone. Last time, she was careless and did not even have the time to use her escape technique before she was stopped by Tangjung. This time, she learned to be smart and escaped when the situation was not right. Now that she's gone, where am I going to find her? I don't have the emperor as a hostage. They won't tell me where those people are being held. Tangjung regretted. He was full of confidence, but he didn't expect that the enemy's cunning was beyond his expectation. Now he was at his wit's end. However, his eyelids suddenly twitched. He turned his eyes and looked not far away. There was a slight fluctuation in the air. There was someone. After he circulated his true chi, his perception would become extremely sharp. Even the slightest movement in the wind would not be able to escape his perception. Junko didn't escape? Tangjung was overjoyed. His figure flashed and rushed in that direction. Whoosh! A person leaped out from the corner and dashed in the opposite direction like an arrow fired from a bow. It's not Junko. You want to escape? No way. Tangjung didn't see the other's appearance, but this kind of skill was definitely not simple. How could he let the other escape? With a leap, he flew over the other's head and steadily landed on the ground, blocking the other's path. Looking closely, he cried out in surprise. It's you! Li Xiaotian had to stop. She forced a smile and said, Tangjung, we meet again. When enemies meet, their eyes would turn red. Tangjung no longer had the slightest bit of pity for Li Xiaotian. A few days ago, he had almost died in her hands. If he continued to be merciful to her, then his brain would be fried. So Tangjung mercilessly attacked. Li Xiaotian didn't resist and quickly fell into Tangjung's hands. You're not afraid that I'll kill you. You still have the guts to come here. Tangjung murderously said. Wu also angrily glared and bluntly said, it's useless to talk to her. She has a glib tongue. Don't be fooled by her. Tangjung also had the same intention. This two-faced woman's mouth was like a lotus flower. If he didn't pay attention, he would fall into her trap. It was best not to waste his saliva with her. Seeing Tangjung's killing intent, Li Xiaotian's face slightly changed. She couldn't wait to say, don't you want to find Junko? Tangjung stopped his movements and lifted her in front of him. Their eyes met, and they could even feel each other's breathing. What did you say? Say it again. I said, don't you want to find Junko? Li Xiaotian calmly said. Do you know where she is? Of course she is at the Imperial Tutor's mansion. In other words, you know where the Imperial Tutor's mansion is? Tangjung asked. Even the National Security Bureau's Su Yingtian didn't know where the Imperial Tutor's mansion was. This meant that the Li Palace's intelligence was more powerful than the National Security Bureau. Li Xiaotian confidently smiled and said, otherwise, where do you think I have been all this time? You actually went to the Imperial Tutor's mansion. Humph, your Li Palace really colluded with the island nation people. In the past, the island nation people killed many Huaxia compatriots. You actually colluded with these people. This is simply deceiving your master and destroying your ancestors. You betrayed the entire nation and people. Tangjung powerfully accused. He was really too angry. There was a kind of anger burning in his heart. No wonder even though Huaxia's economy had developed, there were still many countries in the world that looked down on the Huaxia. There was a kind of colluding traitor. No wonder people looked down on them. Li Xiaotian heard this and his smile froze. He embarrassedly said, you must have misunderstood. How could our Li Palace collude with the island nation people? Humph, just now Junko clearly said that the information about the island was given to them by your Li Palace. Using their hands to destroy your opponents, this is really a good move. Tangjung sarcastically said. Even if the palace master did this, she must have her own intentions. You don't understand her intentions and casually guessed. This is an extremely irresponsible way of doing things. Li Xiaotian retorted. Tang Zheng coldly snorted and disdainfully said, "If you dare to do it, then you must dare to admit it. Being so fussy, the Li Palace is nothing more than this." Li Xiaotian wanted to refute, but he had no choice but to swallow his words. It was futile for her to explain any further, because what Tang Zheng said was the truth. "Tang Zheng, don't listen to her. Her mouth is full of lies. Killing her is the best solution," Marshall urged. She had always been brooding over the matter of Li Xiaotian scheming to frame Tang Zheng. She simply thought that what she said was nonsense, a lie made up in order to survive. Li Xiaotian's gaze turned, stared at Marshall, and said, "Haha, do you want to kill me that much? You must know that our Li Palace and the Marshall sect have been in cahoots for many years." Marshall remained unmoved and coldly said, "I am no longer a member of the Marshall sect. It's useless for you to reminisce with me." "Yeah, it's useless." As expected, none of the people who came out of the Marshall sect were ordinary people. "However, my life is in Tang Zheng's hands and not yours, so you can't make the decision." Ew. Marshall was speechless. Tang Zheng frowned, waved his hand and said, "Marshall, we can't kill her for the time being. In order to find the whereabouts of the Imperial Advisor's mansion, in order to save those people, her life must be preserved for the time being." "There's no need. Don't you want to know the information in her mind? Just use the soul-searching technique, and no secrets can be hidden." Hiss. When Tang Zheng heard this, he sucked in a breath of cold air. A woman against a woman. It was indeed the most brutal. "Li Xiaotian, listen carefully. Tell me the whereabouts of the Imperial Advisor's mansion now. Otherwise, when I use the soul-searching technique, not only will your secrets be exposed, you will also become a fool because of this, and will no longer be able to stir up trouble. You really are ruthless." Li Xiaotian glared hatefully at Marshall, wishing that he could swallow her whole. "Since you understand, then tell me the truth," Tang Zheng urged. "Haha, if I were you, I wouldn't believe this silly woman's words. She's tall and strong, but her brain isn't working well. You can get the information by killing me, but how are you going to enter the Imperial Advisor's mansion?" Li Xiaotian smiled coldly and asked in ridicule, "What do you mean by that?" Tang Zheng asked. "The Imperial Advisor's mansion is not that easy to enter, and it is even more difficult to see the Imperial Advisor. It is impossible for ordinary people, but my identity is special, and I can freely enter and leave the Imperial Advisor's mansion. So if I die, then I won't be able to bring you there," Li Xiaotian said tirelessly. Although Tang Zheng still had his doubts, he already believed her for the most part. The Imperial Advisor's mansion was so mysterious. There must be a lot of soldiers guarding it. If Li Xiaotian could bring them in, then everything would be much easier. However, the key was whether or not her words could be trusted. The last time Tang Zheng believed her, he was almost killed. If he were to enter the tiger's den again, it would not be so easy. "Tang Zheng, don't believe her. She's a cunning woman. Let's find another way," Marshall anxiously advised. "Hee, this answer is actually very simple. If you want to save someone, then you have to leave me alive. Otherwise, let me die together with those people." Li Xiaotian pretended to be carefree and said. Chapter 677. Seeing that Tang Zheng had promised to believe in Li Xiaotian, Wu wanted to say something but hesitated. Actually, she was also very conflicted in her heart. On one hand, she desperately wanted to save them, so she had to choose to believe in Li Xiaotian. On the other hand, her intuition and experience told her that Li Xiaotian was full of lies, and she could not easily believe her. However, Tang Zheng had already made his decision, so she put those words back into her stomach. Li Xiaotian secretly heaved a sigh of relief, and glanced at Wu complacently. Wu Quan pretended not to see it. His gaze turned, sweeping across the Sky Emperor's corpse on the ground, and asked with a frown, "What should we do?" Tang Zheng looked at the stiff Sky Emperor and sighed regretfully. The people from the Imperial Tutor's mansion were truly ruthless, even daring to kill the Sky Emperor, who knew what kind of medicine they were selling in their gourd. A dead person no longer had any value. Tang Zheng waved his hand and said, "Let's go, there's no need to bother with him." However, with the death of the Sky Emperor, The chaos in the island nation will definitely worsen. Let's just sit back and watch the show. Li Xiaotian looked at the Sky Emperor's corpse absent-mindedly, his brows knitted, as though he was thinking about something. Seeing that, Tang Zheng subconsciously stopped in his tracks and asked, "What are you thinking about?" As if waking up from a dream, Li Xiaotian revealed a brilliant smile and said, "Nothing." However, there was still a lingering doubt in the depths of his eyes. The three of them left the scene, leaving behind the Sky Emperor's corpse lying quietly on the ground. The final destination of the ruler of a country was incomparably desolate. The three of them disguised themselves and passed through the crowd. Looking at the parade on the street, the corner of Tang Zheng's mouth couldn't help but curl up. Although his trip to the island nation this time was filled with danger, he had also gained a lot. He had actually turned the island nation upside down, which could be considered a lesson for this country. Suddenly, a commotion came from the crowd in front of him. Immediately, everyone swarmed towards that direction. What's going on? The three of them looked at each other, not knowing what had happened. Why don't we go take a look? Li Xiaotian suggested. Wu immediately rejected. No, don't think that we don't know what you're thinking. You want to take advantage of the chaos to escape, right? In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, we will continue to advance towards the Imperial Advisor's residence. Tang Zheng considered for a moment, and was about to nod in agreement when he heard a voice coming from afar. This voice is so familiar. He pricked up his ears and looked up. In the distance, he saw a familiar figure speaking passionately in front of a microphone on a huge electronic screen. Damn it! Tang Zheng was flabbergasted as he cursed loudly. Wu and Li Xiaotian's reactions were similar as they stared straight at the person on the screen. Isn't the emperor dead? Why is he speaking on the screen? What is going on? Looking at the excited reaction of the island nation people, it was clear that this was not a video, but a real person speaking. Especially the mess behind him in the Kokyo. It was clear that he was standing in front of the Kokyo and speaking live. In other words, this was not a video, but a live broadcast. But dozens of minutes ago, they had seen the emperor die in the hands of Junko with their own eyes. Tang Zheng had personally checked, and could be 100% sure that he was dead. What the hell? Wasn't this the situation? Although they couldn't understand what the other party was saying, it was obvious that after hearing his speech, the emotions of the island nation people gradually calmed down, and even cheered thunderously. The emperor was a spiritual symbol of the island nation. Previously, it was rumored that the emperor had been captured, and the authorities had always been perfunctory, so the people of the island nation were completely flustered, causing a series of riots. At this moment, after hearing the emperor's speech, he accused the rumors of being a conspiracy of the enemy forces, telling the people not to believe it. Li Xiaotian had been staring at the emperor on the screen. Suddenly, she raised her eyebrows and exclaimed in realization, "I know." "What do you know?" Tang Zheng and Wu immediately turned their heads to look at her. "I know what's going on. No wonder Junko would kill that person without mercy, because that person is not the real emperor," Li Xiaotian said solemnly. Ah. Tang Zheng and Wu were shocked. They didn't understand what she meant. "We've all been deceived. The island nation people are too cunning. They actually pushed out a substitute to block the wind and rain and confuse everyone," Li Xiaotian said hatefully. She had always been the one to lie to others. When had she ever been deceived like this? But this time, she was careless, and was actually deceived by a group of island nation people for so long, playing in circles. She was truly furious. Tang Zheng and Wu were not idiots. After thinking about it, they went through all the clues that had led to this. Gradually, they realized that what Li Xiaotian said was probably true. They had really been played by the island nation people. No, not only them, the people of the island nation, and even the people of the entire world had been played by the island nation people. It turned out that the island nation had always nurtured a substitute for the emperor, and when necessary, they would push it out as a scapegoat. The imperial tutor's mansion was clearly aware of this, which was why they killed the scapegoat without hesitation. I was saying that the emperor's body had a hidden illness. How could it be as if nothing had happened? So he was just a fake, The Real Emperor was the person on the screen. Li Xiaotian pointed at the screen and said fiercely. Tang Zheng once again looked over. Although the Emperor's words were sonorous and powerful, as if he was full of spirit, in Tang Zheng's eyes, his spirit was all fate. How could the illness between his brows escape Tang Zheng's fiery eyes? He is the real emperor, he is really sick. Tang Zheng said. So the person I've been capturing is a substitute, damn it. But why did the real emperor not come out a while ago, allowing the country to be in turmoil, but now he came out again? Wu asked suspiciously. Li Xiaotian laughed coldly and joked. Your head is too simple. You can't even figure out such a simple question. Wu's face turned cold as he said, say that again. Tang Zheng hurriedly dissuaded him and explained. This is the cunning part of the other party. They know very well that we don't know that we caught an imposter. If the real emperor were to appear, then we would know. Although it's a fake, it's still hard to distinguish between the real emperor and the fake. It's the same for us and for others. If we knew the truth, we could still use the fake in our hands. We could casually broadcast it all over the world, and make him admit that he is the real emperor. Then the dignity of the royal family would be gone. In fact, they would be afraid that we would kill the fake in front of the people. That would be the real deal. Even if they were to push out the real emperor, the people would not completely believe them. In short, only when the fake is confirmed to be dead will the real emperor dare to come out and refute the rumors. The imperial advisor's mansion really played a good hand. They used the news of Wu Junshan and the others to deceive us, and then took the opportunity to kill the emperor, completely destroying the card in our hands. They really put in a lot of effort. Tang Zheng spoke tirelessly, causing Wu to come to a realization. He gradually understood the mystery behind it, and couldn't help but sigh at the cunning of the island nation people. Li Xiaotian, haven't you always been in cahoots with the people of the island nation? Don't tell me you don't know about the matter of the monk? Tang Zheng asked. Li Xiaotian smiled bitterly. This must be the top secret of the island nation. Do you think I would know? Then does that mean that the other information that Junko said is also fake? Master, and the others are not in the hands of the imperial advisor's mansion? Wu exclaimed. Tang Zheng's face darkened as he fell into deep thought. To be honest, he was truly unable to determine this point. The imperial advisor's mansion's tricks were too powerful. He was unable to accurately determine which sentence was true and which sentence was false. Li Xiaotian smiled mysteriously and said, that might not be the case. The imperial advisor personally admitted that he imprisoned Wu Junshan and the others. Really? Tang Zheng was skeptical. I know you don't believe me. As for whether you believe me or not this time, it all depends on you. Li Xiaotian shrugged and said indifferently. Tang Zheng and Wu looked at each other and communicated with their eyes. Wu took a deep breath and said, trust her again. Tang Zheng nodded. Li Xiaotian laughed. Smart, if you don't believe me, then there's no need to go to the imperial advisor's mansion. Since that's the case, then continue leading the way. The three of them continued forward. After passing through the bustling city, they realized that the gathered people had gradually dispersed. All of them had satisfied smiles on their faces. The appearance of the heavenly emperor had truly appeased these people. Wu said unwillingly, let's go back and get the heavenly emperor's corpse. Then, we'll expose it to the public. I wonder if it will cause a bit of a stir. Tang Zheng shook his head. It's useless, not to mention that the imposter's corpse is definitely long gone. Even if we find it, it's useless. A dead person is not as useful as a living person. This time we've been tricked by the other party. We must be more careful in the future. After saying that, he subconsciously raised his head to look at Li Xiaotian. Li Xiaotian felt his gaze, but remained calm and composed as he walked in front alone. Li Xiaotian, you have a cooperation with the imperial advisor's mansion, and now you are bringing us to the imperial advisor's mansion. Aren't you afraid that the imperial advisor's mansion will turn hostile and deal with you instead? Tang Zheng asked curiously. In any case, I am not on the same path as the imperial advisor's mansion. Are you afraid that they will fall out with me? Li Xiaotian said indifferently. What kind of place is the imperial advisor's mansion? If you go, you will definitely be disappointed, because the imperial advisor's mansion is just a small village. It is like a paradise without any outsiders to disturb it. This is a place that many ancient scholars yearn for. However, Tang Zheng frowned and said, "A beautiful appearance often means danger. The more beautiful it is, the more deceptive it is." "Hehe, are you hinting at me?" Li Xiaotian covered his mouth and chuckled. "I'll take it as a compliment. This is the most beautiful compliment I've ever heard." "Shameless," Wu complained indignantly. Li Xiaotian turned a deaf ear to him and continued, "Although the imperial advisor's mansion is quiet and beautiful, there are dangers hidden within. This is without a doubt, so if you barge in, you must be prepared to sacrifice yourselves. You don't have to worry about it. Just lead the way." Chapter 678. Tang Zheng and Marshall hurriedly looked over. There was chaos in front of them and a thick fog shrouded them, making it impossible to see the path ahead clearly. "Something strange," Duan Yen said. Tang Zheng looked at Li Xiaotian. Li Xiaotian smiled mysteriously and said, "Of course not anyone can enter the imperial tutor's mansion. I am a guest of the imperial tutor's mansion, so of course I have the authority." After he finished speaking, he took out a token and pressed it against the whirlpool. The thick fog began to fluctuate violently, and not long after, a small path appeared beneath his feet. "Do you dare to go in?" Li Xiaotian laughed mischievously. Tang Zheng did not say a word, and took the lead to walk in with large strides. In fact, this was just a trick, a type of illusion technique. To Tang Zheng it was not unfamiliar, and it was not that amazing. The key was that Tang Zheng could not predict what kind of danger lay behind the fog. But now that things had come to this, he had no way out. Even if it was a dragon's lair or a tiger's den, he still had to barge in. Marshall followed without hesitation. The corner of Li Xiaotian's mouth hooked up into a meaningful smile, and followed behind the two of them. Not long after, the thick fog gradually dissipated, and the scene in front of them suddenly opened up. A quiet village appeared in front of them. Small bridges, flowing water, green grass, shady trees, blue sky and white clouds. It was as if they had traveled to an ancient paradise. There was no hustle and bustle of modern society, making people feel relaxed and happy. "This is the imperial tutor's mansion?" Tang Zheng and Marshall asked in astonishment. "Welcome to the imperial tutor's mansion," Li Xiaotian said with a smile. Looking at the sparse houses, Tang Zheng became extremely alert and asked, "Where is the imperial tutor?" Li Xiaotian pointed to the deepest part of the village and said, "That small wooden house." Tang Zheng suppressed the emotions in his heart and walked over. Marshall and Li Xiaotian also quickly followed. Li Xiaotian rolled his eyes with suspicion and thought, "Why is it so quiet all around? There's not even a sound, and there's not even a shadow?" She still remembered the various disciples of the imperial preceptor's mansion a few days ago, but today, these people seem to have evaporated into thin air. Something must be wrong when things are out of the ordinary. However, Li Xiaotian didn't say anything. He just silently followed Tang Zheng, ready to go. The cabin was not far away, and it did not take long for the three of them to arrive in front of it. Tang Zheng subconsciously stopped in his tracks. Circulating his Jinqi, Zhang Xian focused his mind and held his breath. His perception increased rapidly. Someone. A strong breathing sound entered his ears clearly. "Be careful, there's someone," Tang Zheng warned in a low voice. Creak. As soon as he finished speaking, the wooden door was pushed open and a person walked out leisurely. The pupils of the three shrunk as they stared at this person. It was actually Junko, who had used an escape technique to escape. Junko's face had a playful expression as she swept a glance at the three of them and said, "Your speed is really fast. You found this place so quickly." With that, she coldly snorted and changed the topic. She stared at Li Xiaotian and meaningfully said, "You've really sold out our imperial preceptor's mansion." Li Xiaotian remained unmoved as he looked at Junko with a frown and remained silent. Junko slightly turned her head and stared at Tang Zheng and said, "Are you really not afraid of death? Are those people that important to you?" Tang Zheng coldly said, "Your scheme is very powerful. I actually watched as the Emperor's substitute died in your hands. But do you think this is the end? Your thinking is too simple. Oh, do you think you can find out the whereabouts of those people by coming here? This is the Imperial Preceptor's mansion, not the Imperial Palace. Do you think you can do whatever you want here? Junko disagreed as she jokingly said. Even if I know that this is a dragon's pool and tiger's den, I still have to barge in. Now you won't use an escape technique to escape, right? Junko's gaze was somewhat strange as she said, You actually recognized my escape technique. You are indeed a powerful cultivator like the information stated. Since you know this, then hurry up and hand over those people. Marshall took a step forward and said, If you don't hand them over, then I'll burn your Imperial Preceptor's mansion to ruins just like the Imperial Palace. Creak. As if it heard the word fire, Xiaobai came out from Tang Zheng's backpack and stood on his shoulder. Junko's pupils shrank as she asked, What kind of animal is this? Tang Zheng remained unmoved and said, Don't talk so much nonsense. Hurry up and hand them over. I don't have anyone. But since you've delivered yourself to my door, of course you can't leave. Miss Li, I really have to thank you for leading them here. Junko said with a smile. Li Xiaoyan's heart trembled as he suddenly realized. So you knew that I was following you. You deliberately let me follow you and then led them here? Hee, if it wasn't for you, how could they obediently enter the trap? This time it's really all thanks to you. Junko said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You. Li Xiaotian flew into a rage. He was actually used as a gun, and he didn't even know about it. This kind of situation had always been done by him to others. When had others ever done it to him? He was extremely angry, but he forcefully suppressed his anger. He only stared at Junko like a tiger watching its prey. If you want to keep me, then you have to have the ability to do so. Tang Zheng was alarmed. It turned out that all of this was a trap set by the other party. The Imperial Preceptor's mansion's scheme was linked to one another. It was hard to guard against. Even someone as meticulous as Li Xiaotian was not able to see through it. But at this juncture, he couldn't care less about whether or not it was a trap. Since he was in danger, he should make the first move to gain the upper hand. Thus, before he finished speaking, Tang Zheng had already made the first move. With a schwa sound, the War Soul Sword pierced towards the opponent's chest. Now that he was killing an enemy, he didn't show any mercy. The War Soul Sword's brilliance might cause people's hearts to tremble in fear. Whoosh! A gust of wind blew out from the wooden house. Bang! The gust of wind struck the War Soul Sword and Tang Zheng's attack collapsed. He staggered back a step and looked at the dim wooden house in shock. Who? This person actually escaped his perception. When he circulated his energy to sense again, he still found that the wooden house was empty. However, it was clear that there was an expert hidden inside. Could it be the legendary Imperial Preceptor? Tang Zheng and Marshall looked at each other, both of them guessing this point. The Imperial Preceptor was one of the most mysterious people in the island nation. He was also one of the most powerful people. Such an expert was actually living in seclusion in such a small wooden house. Moreover, before he even saw Lu Shan's true face, Tang Zheng was already intimidated by the other party's casual counterattack. This person's strength is definitely something I've never seen before in my life. Tang Zheng came to a conclusion. This Imperial Preceptor was undoubtedly an expert of the Grand Master realm. As for what level of Grand Master he was, it was still impossible to determine. However, Tang Zheng understood that if he was alone, he would definitely not be his match. However, with the four symbols venerable by his side, he was much more confident. He took a step forward and said, Hiding your head and showing your tail, don't you dare to come out and see me? Junko mocked. Who do you think you are? Is the Imperial Preceptor someone you can meet just because you want to? Is that so? Then I'll tear down your little hut, and see how you're going to hide. Tang Zheng held onto the War Soul Sword with both hands and growled. Return to origin. He immediately used the fifth move of the Heaven-Flying Immortal, Return to Origin. This was already the pinnacle of the Heaven-Flying Immortal Sword technique that he cultivated. In the blink of an eye, the War Soul Sword became ordinary and fell towards the small wooden hut. Clang! A clear and melodious sound came out from the small wooden hut, as if a sword had been unsheathed. Tang Zheng's expression turned cold, but his return to origin sword move was not affected in the slightest. Whiz! With a sound of breaking through the air, a cold light shot out and struck the War Soul sword. Clang! An intense spark flew in all directions, and the War Soul sword could no longer fall any further. Taking a closer look, what flew over was actually a sword, but the sword was already covered in dust and was dim. However, when facing the War Soul sword, it was not at a disadvantage at all, and steadily stopped it. Tang Zheng's eyes bulged. He took a deep breath and changed his sword move. The powerful and heavy Heaven-Flying Immortal's fourth move, Heaven Falls Earth Rends, was unleashed. Clang! The War Soul sword fiercely slashed onto the Nameless sword, causing it to tremble and fall to the ground with a pada sound. Tang Zheng was shaken. The terrifying force that came from the Nameless sword was truly not to be underestimated. Let's see what other tricks you have up your sleeve. Tang Zheng once again used his great sword, determined to destroy the small wooden hut. But just as he raised the War Soul sword, 3 piercing sounds resounded through the clouds, and 3 cold beams of light flew over. Damn, why are there so many swords? Tang Zheng thought that the sword just now was the other party's sword, but it was obvious that he was wrong. The 3 arrows that flew over were all different. There were long swords, short swords, and heavy swords. It was impossible for a person to use so many swords. However, the lethality of these 3 swords was extremely terrifying. Left, middle, right, 3 directions firmly locked onto Tang Zheng, leaving him with nowhere to dodge. Tang Zheng's expression was solemn. The War Soul sword let out a clear sword cry, buzzing and trembling, as if it was excited to meet an expert. Break! Tang Zheng roared, and in the blink of an eye he attacked 3 times. Wind rising, clouds surging, sword breaking 1,000 caddies, lightning sparks flint. 3 Heaven-Flying Immortals sword technique, 3 completely different offensive sword moves. Yet they were perfectly fused together. Ding ding dang dang. Sparks flew in all directions. The 3 different swords were all knocked down, but Tang Zheng also staggered back, his arms trembling, and the War Soul sword almost fell out of his hands. Junko's face changed. She thought to herself, Tang Zheng is indeed powerful, to be able to receive 2 moves of the Imperial Master's 4 swords. But he did not suffer much damage. But so what? It was still impossible for him to be a match for the Imperial Master. Junko was extremely confident. She stood at the door and looked at Tang Zheng in ridicule. Tang Zheng's face turned pale white. Wu immediately asked in a low voice, "How is it?" "The enemy is tricky, be careful later," Tang Zheng warned, and then patted Xiaobai's head. "Xiaobai, act according to the situation later. Protect Wu well." A gentle light flashed across Wu Wu's eyes. The words of rejection were about to come out of his mouth, but he swallowed them back down. Li Xiaotian looked at the wooden hut with a complicated expression, not knowing what would happen next. Tang Zheng took another step forward, preparing to launch another attack. No matter how powerful the opponent was, for the sake of the whereabouts of Wu Junshan and the rest, he had to give it his all. Chapter 679. You want to destroy this old man's hut? Heh, this is the dream of many people. However, these people often turn into skeletons in the end, leaving behind only their swords that are buried in my sword tomb. The Imperial advisor's voice was neither fast nor slow, but every syllable was extremely powerful, like a heavy hammer striking one's heart. Sword tomb. Tang Zheng's heart moved. He looked over and sure enough, there was a huge pit in the dimly lit room, and there were many swords stuck in it. Could it be that those swords just now flew out from the sword tomb? The so-called sword tomb, as the name implied, was the tomb of the sword. According to the Imperial advisor, these swords were all left behind by the people who challenged him after they died, so they were called sword tomb. Not only were these swords buried, it was also equivalent to burying their original owners. He could vaguely tell that there were over 100 swords in the sword tomb, which meant that there were over 100 people with superb swordsmanship who came to challenge him. And in the end they all lost their lives. After going through hundreds of battles, it should be nothing more than this. Tang Zheng sighed. So what if it's the sword tomb? What's buried are all dead things. How can it bury people? Tang Zheng said with a resounding voice. Heh, Then I'll let you die here. Let's see if you can still boast so shamelessly. The imperial advisor said coldly. Just as his voice disappeared, the sword in the sword tomb started to buzz and tremble, as if it had a life of its own. Tang Zheng's face changed. He kept the War Soul sword and switched to using the heaven-shocking bow and the shooting sun arrows. When Li Xiaotian saw the two divine armaments, his eyes immediately erupted with a blazing light. He wished that he could immediately snatch them over and take them for himself. Clang, clang, clang. The sharp sword soared into the air and flew out from the sword tomb. They floated in the air as an invisible force controlled them. So. The sharp swords changed their direction and aimed at Tang Zheng. The sound of them tearing through the air was like 10,000 arrows shooting towards Tang Zheng at the same time. Wang. The bowstring vibrated, and the shooting sun arrow at the tip of his finger left his hand. Boom. Kacha. The shooting sun arrows hit the sharp swords, and the sound of breaking rang out one after another. The first few swords broke into pieces and fell to the ground. However, the attack of the shooting sun arrows dissipated because of these swords, and they fell to the ground with a clatter. Tang Zheng was shocked. Last time in the Kokyo, so many people from the island nation were unable to block the shooting sun arrows. But this time, a single sword was able to wear down the shooting sun arrows. This was enough to show how powerful and domineering the imperial tutor's attack was. The attacks of the other swords did not slow down at all, and they continued to fly towards him at lightning speed. Tang Zheng didn't have time to feel sorry for the shooting sun arrow on the ground. He continuously pulled the bowstring and released two shooting sun arrows at the same time to meet the overwhelming sharp swords. Boom. Two loud noises were heard, followed by another cracking sound. Tang Zheng did not have the time to appreciate his own battle achievements as he pulled Wu and quickly moved to the side. The sound of something tearing through the air brushed past their ears, and a few cold lights flew past them. If they were still standing there, their bodies would definitely be pierced through. Without a doubt, the result of this attack was already very clear. Tang Zheng had used 3 shooting sun arrows, and although he had destroyed dozens of his opponent's sharp swords, the imperial tutor still controlled the remaining sharp swords and almost killed him. The difference in strength was obvious. Even though Tang Zheng had the heaven-shocking bow and the shooting sun arrows, he was still unable to gain the upper hand. This imperial tutor is at least at the 6th level of the Grandmaster stage. Tang Zheng guessed with his own experience. For a small country to be able to cultivate to such a level, he could already be considered to have reached the peak. It could also be seen how astonishing his talent was. Meeting such a genius, and a veteran genius at that, Tang Zheng's pressure increased exponentially. Only now did he understand why the imperial tutor was so calm and confident. Because the other party did have the ability. Looking at the shooting sun arrows that had fallen to the ground not far away, Tang Zheng was in pain. If this thing fell into the hands of the other party, it would be a huge loss. As if they had a tacit understanding, Xiaobai jumped down from Tang Zheng's shoulder and turned into a white light as it rushed into the house. "You little thing, do you still dare to come and die?" The imperial tutor did not take it seriously at all, and said with a murderous aura. The broken sword fragments on the ground rose into the air, and turned into specks of cold light, shooting toward Xiaobai from all directions, as if they wanted to turn it into a hedgehog. Xiaobai's eyes flashed with a red light as it squeaked and opened its mouth. Boom! Flames soared into the sky, and the broken sword fragments in all directions were completely enveloped by the flames. They fell to the ground one after another, and some even melted into a pool of molten iron. The flames spread in all directions and quickly ignited the wooden walls. The small house immediately turned into a sea of fire. The imperial tutor and Junko obviously did not expect this situation. Junko was stunned, and only the raging flames were left in her eyes. The imperial preceptor let out an angry roar. A figure soared into the sky from the flames, and then landed heavily on the ground, causing the ground to tremble. The small wooden house had turned into a sea of fire, and the sword tomb in the center of the sea of fire had also turned into a mess. A white light rushed out of the flames and fell on Tang Zheng's head, and there were 3 shooting sun arrows in its mouth. Tang Zheng patted Xiaobai's head approvingly, and under Li Xiaoyan's reluctant gaze, he put away the shooting sun arrows. Then, he looked up and saw a short old man at the edge of the sea of fire. It was the imperial tutor. He didn't look like a grandmaster at all. Instead, he looked like an ordinary old man. He had a thin body and white hair. Even his back was a little stooped, which made his already small body look even smaller and weaker. If they met such a person on the road, many people would even curl their lips in disdain and stay away from him. No one would regard him as a master of a generation. But at this moment, in front of experts like Tang Zheng, the lethality contained in this thin body made them not dare to underestimate him. They even felt a little scared. The imperial tutor's eyes were very small, almost narrowed into slits. He stared straight at Tang Zheng and Xiaobai on his shoulder. What kind of demonic beast is this? It can breathe fire and destroy my sword tomb. Tang Zheng patted Xiaobai's head, looked at the imperial tutor and said jokingly, "Didn't you always want to be a coward? Now that your turtle shell has been burned, I want to see how you'll hide your head and show your tail." The imperial tutor was unable to restrain his anger. His eyes almost popped out of their sockets, but his eyes suddenly turned and he revealed a mysterious smile. "Tang Zheng, your empty words are useless. So what if my sword tomb is destroyed? With you, I don't need this bluffing sword tomb." The imperial tutor's words caused Tang Zheng's expression to change. He asked, "What do you mean?" Li Xiaotian had already guessed the imperial tutor's intentions. He suddenly realized, "So you used me as bait to lure them here for Tang Zheng?" "For me?" Tang Zheng was confused. For a moment, he couldn't figure out what he had that was worth coveting. The imperial tutor's cultivation was truly very high, far surpassing Tang Zheng's. What could he possibly want? The imperial tutor glanced at Li Xiaotian and sighed. "The holy maiden of the Li Palace truly has an outstanding mind. You've so quickly guessed my intentions. Tang Zheng, do you still not understand your own value?" Tang Zheng had already faintly guessed a few things. He speculated, the island nation's ninjutsu is only half-baked. It was born from Huaxia's magic. Could it be that you've taken a fancy to my identity as a cultivator and want to dig out the secrets of magic from me? Haha. As expected of an outstanding youth. As expected, you're not an idiot. You've guessed correctly. You're more valuable than anyone else here. Because you're a cultivator, you've systematically learned magic. The island nation's ninjutsu, with the support of the essence of these magic, will rapidly rise, develop, and become even more powerful. The imperial tutor didn't hide anything and admitted without restraint. Tang Zheng's heart jumped. He actually guessed correctly. This imperial tutor really had a good plan. His plan was so far-sighted that it was unexpected. Just like what the imperial tutor had said, if the island nation's ninjutsu had the essence of Huaxia's magic, then there would definitely be a qualitative leap. For such a nation, if they were given the opportunity to increase their strength, then their self-confidence would also increase. In the end, they would definitely bully the weak and even start a war. This was the nature of this nation. Dogs can't change their habit of eating shit. Even if you catch me, I won't reveal half a word to you, Tang Zheng said resolutely. The imperial tutor didn't mind. He faintly smiled and said, "You don't need to speak. I have my own ways to know the information in your mind." Tang Zheng was shocked. He immediately remembered the soul-searching technique. This kind of magic wasn't too difficult. There were also many mysterious ninjutsu techniques. Perhaps there was a similar magic to the soul-searching technique. Therefore, as long as Tang Zheng fell into the hands of the imperial tutor, no matter how tight his mouth was, it would be useless. Tang Zheng fiercely stared at the imperial tutor. Looking at the confidence between his eyebrows, Tang Zheng gnashed his teeth in hatred. The opponent's plan was too accurate. One step after another, inviting him to fall into the trap. Tang Zheng unconsciously fell into the trap. "Miss Li, when you go back this time, please pass on my gratitude to your palace master. Without you, it would be impossible for me to capture Tang Zheng and complete the great plan that I have dreamed of for so many years," the state preceptor said happily, as if victory was already in his grasp. Li Xiaotian looked at Tang Zheng with a complicated expression. She couldn't help but feel a sense of powerlessness. She had always thought that her plan was flawless. This time, the island nation suffered a fatal Waterloo. The older, the wiser. In front of the state preceptor, this old ginger, her scheme seemed a little too immature. Li Xiaotian, you also didn't think that there would be such a result, right? Let me tell you, if he really captured me and let him know the secret of Huaxia's magic, and then combined it with ninjutsu, do you think that your martial arts will be a match for his ninjutsu? At that time, when you kill all the cultivators, that will be the time for the island nation to make a comeback. Tang Zheng said jokingly. Li Xiaotian's face was very ugly. She slowly said, I also didn't think that it would turn out like this. She was a little regretful. She was very clear about the ambition of the island nation. There was a huge deviation in the mission that the palace master gave her. She didn't know if the palace master knew the current situation. Chapter 680. At this point, there was no turning back. No matter how much Li Xiaotian regretted, it was useless as he hung his head dejectedly as if he was grieving for his parents. Tang Zheng had already secretly circulated his innate qi and warned Marshall in a low voice. Wait a moment, I will delay the imperial teacher, you escape first. Marshall remained unmoved as she stared straight at the imperial advisor. With a shout, she had already rushed out first. Tang Zheng fiercely stomped his foot. Marshall was good at everything, but she was often impulsive and rushed forward. Wasn't it precisely these qualities that separated her from Li Xiaotian? Both of them were important members of the mysterious organization, but Marshall's straightforwardness was completely different from Li Xiaotian's craftiness. This caused Tang Zheng to unknowingly have a good impression of Marshall and gradually develop hatred towards Li Xiaotian. Marshall rushed forward and closed in on the imperial teacher in the blink of an eye. But the imperial teacher did not even put her in his eyes. How dare you? A graceful figure blocked in front of the imperial teacher, as Junko stared at Marshall with a frosty expression. She extended her arm and the autumn water sword was already swinging with sword chi as it pierced towards Marshall. Marshall waved her hand, and the roaring flame blade brought forth a string of raging flames. The air surged as she fought fiercely with Junko. The imperial teacher passed by the two and walked straight towards Tang Zheng. He smiled and said, Don't make any unnecessary resistance, the one who will suffer will be you. If you are willing to submit to me, I can let bygones be bygones. In the future, you will be able to reach a position above millions of people. This is something that many people dream of. Above millions of people. I'm afraid that I will be below you? Tang Zheng sneered. Of course, everyone will be restricted, and you are no exception. However, this is already a supreme power. The imperial teacher said as if it was a matter of course. You really have an extraordinarily big ambition. Tang Zheng sighed as his guess was not wrong. The imperial teacher had the ambition of a wolf, and was probably no different from those who started the war. The people of the island nation indeed had wild ambitions hidden in their hearts. Once they had the chance, they would unreservedly reveal them. Thank you for the compliment. This is the long-cherished wish of the island nation's ancestors. Of course, I have the obligation and responsibility to help them achieve it, the imperial tutor said proudly. Tang Zheng gritted his teeth, unable to refute. With a thought he shouted, Then we'll talk about it after you pass this test. Boom. The gigantic body of the four symbols venerable immediately appeared. Both of its feet landed on the ground, causing the ground to tremble incessantly. Even the nearby stream splashed up. The imperial advisor raised his head to look at the four symbols' lords. His face was slightly astonished as he exclaimed, Is this the giant that wreaked havoc in the imperial palace? Even missiles can't hurt it. It's really extraordinary. After pausing for a moment, greed flooded the Grand Preceptor's eyes. He stared at the four symbols venerable with scorching light and said, Huaxia really does have a deep heritage. Even you have the fortune to obtain something so powerful. If I can obtain it, I'll be even more powerful. Tang Zheng's pupils constricted. His opponent was really bold. He was actually thinking about the four symbols venerable again. You'll have to have the ability to do so first. Tang Zheng said coldly. The four symbols venerable was his greatest reliance. He had faced many Grandmaster-level experts, and was able to escape unscathed all because of the four symbols Venerable. However, he could clearly sense that the four symbols Venerable was not in its best condition after summoning it this time. A few days ago in the Imperial Palace, the four symbols Venerable was hit by missiles. Even Tang Zheng vomited blood. The four symbols Venerable was damaged. Later on, Tang Zheng was unable to find a way to completely repair the four symbols Venerable, which led to the current sequelae. He had originally planned to properly repair the four symbols Venerable after returning to the country. He did not expect to have to use it again so soon. Would the damaged four symbols Venerable be able to withstand the Imperial Advisor? Tang Zheng had no idea. This battle was the most uneasy he had ever been in so many battles. Not only did it concern his personal survival, but it also concerned the lives of martial artists, Wu Junshan, and the others. The weight of the responsibility on his shoulders was unprecedentedly heavy. It was so heavy that he could barely breathe. The Imperial Advisor was not intimidated by the four symbols Venerable. He strode over and said, "Then let me see its battle prowess." Evidently, he was exceptionally confident in his own strength. Tang Zheng jumped onto the four symbols Venerable without a word and disappeared into its chest. Xiao Bai also jumped onto the four symbols Venerable's shoulder. It bared its teeth at the Imperial Advisor, its battle intent soaring. The Imperial Advisor stood with his hands behind his back. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and shot into the air, charging straight at the four symbols Venerable. The four symbols Venerable dodged nimbly. However, it was too big in the end and could not evade in time. The Imperial Advisor's foot landed on its chest. Boom! Tang Zheng felt as if an earthquake had struck. He was on the verge of collapsing as a sharp ringing sound in his ears almost tore his eardrums apart. Even though Tang Zheng had expected this, he was still shocked by the might of a single attack. He only cultivated a half-baked ninjutsu. How could he have such power? Tang Zheng was indignant. However, he also understood that it was definitely because the other party's talent was too great. He must be a genius of all kinds. Tang Zheng was not wrong. Everyone in the Imperial Advisor's residence was very talented. They were all outstanding figures who far surpassed ordinary people. They were geniuses elected by the entire nation. The Imperial Advisor was a genius among geniuses. It was not hard to imagine how powerful they were. It could be said that Huaxia was lacking in this aspect. There were many sects, each of them fighting openly and covertly. The internal friction was too severe. Island Nation had few people and land, but it could not stop the other party's internal and external unity. They used the entire nation's power to cultivate talents. Naturally, their results were extraordinary. Tang Zheng did not have time to sigh because the Imperial Advisor rushed up again. This time, he did not use the tip of his foot, but his finger aimed at the Venerable Four Symbols' chest. The Imperial Advisor was very smart. He did not attack the other parts of the Venerable Four Symbols. He understood that the Venerable Four Symbols' body was impenetrable, so he deliberately chose the chest. This was where Tang Zheng had disappeared. The door in the chest was definitely the Venerable Four Symbols' life gate. His choice was correct. When Tang Zheng saw the rapidly approaching finger, he subconsciously placed his fists in front of his chest. Boom! The finger touched the Venerable Four Symbols' fist. A puff of green smoke rose. A white spot was left on the fist as if it had been burned. A white spot. Tang Zheng looked at it in shock, as his heart was in turmoil. The four divine beasts had fought with him so many times, but no matter if it was swords, blades, guns, or even missiles, none of them were able to leave a single mark on the four divine beasts. But this time he had miscalculated. The Imperial Advisor's seemingly light finger actually left a white spot. It was completely possible to imagine the destructive power contained in that finger. So large and so nimble. What a great treasure. The Imperial Advisor's thoughts became more and more heated. You can block me once, but can you block me this time? He raised his arm and his expression became abnormally cold. Killing intent filled his body. Tang Zheng guarded his mind and focused all his attention. However, he did not see the Imperial Advisor's next move. He could not help but feel puzzled. Why was he bluffing like this? Was he trying to show off? Of course not. Li Xiaotian had also been observing the imperial advisor. From his attacks, she came to a shocking conclusion. The imperial advisor's strength was not inferior to Li Palace's palace master, Granny Li. One had to know that Li Palace was one of the three great mysterious organizations. The other clans could not compare. As the master of Li Palace, Granny Li's strength was obvious. However, this bullshit imperial advisor of a small country was actually not inferior to Granny Li. This was too shocking. No wonder he said so confidently that he could deal with Wu Junshan and the others. Looks like he was not lying. But isn't there Lan Yu by Wu Junshan's side? Her cultivation is not inferior to Wu Junshan's. Could it be that the two of them together are still not his match? Li Xiaotian could almost hear the sound of her heart beating, because this guess was too shocking. If the imperial advisor was really so powerful, then he could directly kill his way to Huaxia. No one could stop him because he was practically invincible. No, I must be mistaken somewhere. Li Xiaotian hurriedly shook her head, denying this absurd idea. If he was really so powerful, why would he be so obsessed with Tang Zheng's technique? Therefore, there must be some secret behind this that she did not know. However, if he was not so powerful, then how could Wu Junshan and the others fall into his hands? Li Xiaotian felt a headache coming on. Even someone as smart as her could not figure it out. Peng. Suddenly, a loud sound interrupted her thoughts and pulled her back to the real world. She subconsciously turned her head to look. The battle between Junko and Marshall had already reached its climax. Junko had the autumn water sword, which was obviously a treasure sword, causing Junko to be like a tiger that had grown wings. Marshall's roaring flame blade was also very powerful, but after all, it was a pair of hands. Compared to ordinary swords, it was not at a disadvantage. However, in front of the autumn water sword, they would suffer a loss after a long battle. Therefore, Marshall gradually retreated, feeling that it was difficult for him to hold on alone. Li Xiaotian's expression was very ugly. Although she did not get along with Marshall, they were both from Huaxia. Being bullied by an island nation girl like this, she found it difficult to calm down. However, she did not lend a helping hand. The current situation was too delicate. Tang Zheng and Marshall were both at a disadvantage. If she joined the battle, it would be useless. Instead, she would put herself in a dangerous situation. Li Xiaotian was an absolutely calm person. Before doing anything, she had to weigh the pros and cons, hoping to maximize her benefits and reduce the danger. At this moment, it was obviously not a wise decision to lend a helping hand. Suddenly, a trace of splendor appeared in her eyes. She looked at Marshall in disbelief and muttered to herself, "How can this be? What kind of martial arts is this?" At this moment, Marshall had already undergone a huge change. She had already stopped retreating. Her palms flew up as if they had turned into flames. This is definitely not the roaring flame blade. The roaring flame blade is not like this. Li Xiaotian's mouth twitched as she could not help but exclaim. She could clearly feel the power contained within the palms. It was not something the roaring flame blade could compare to. The key point was that she had never heard of such a martial arts technique. This meant that it was not a martial arts technique. Then where did she learn it from? Li Xiaotian's heart was in a mess. Chapter 681. Dark Flame Divine Palm. The martial arts manual that Tang Zheng took out from the first floor of Langya Pavilion. Back then, he took out a total of 2 things from the first floor of Langya Pavilion. In addition to this martial arts manual, there was also a mysterious box. Wu Zue had been immersed in practicing the Inferno Divine Palm for some time now, but she had never used it properly. At this moment, the roaring flame saber was no longer enough to deal with Junko, so she had no choice but to use the Dark Flame Divine Palm. The Dark Flame Divine Palm and the roaring flame saber had something in common. They both cultivated the inner strength to become more overbearing. However, the Dark Flame Divine Palm was clearly superior. This was the understanding that Wu had since she started cultivating. It was precisely because the Dark Flame Divine Palm was too overbearing that it was especially difficult to cultivate. Although she had been cultivating for so long, She had not completely grasped the essence of the dark flame divine palm. At this point, she could not care so much. She circulated the dark flame divine palm's mental cultivation method, and her palms immediately turned fiery red, as if they had turned into flames. The surrounding air rippled as if it was producing dense chi. Junko's face was cold as she stared at this scene. She knew that the opponent had changed their martial arts. Although they had not exchanged blows yet, she could already tell that this martial arts manual was extraordinary. Junko was not afraid. After all, their cultivation levels were similar. Of course, even if they changed their martial arts, how powerful could it be? The autumn water sword swung through the air, and with a sharp sound, it pierced towards Wu. Wu's cheeks also turned crimson. Her entire body seemed to be burning as she pushed her palms forward. Waves of heat rolled as if an invisible flame was gushing out from her palms, wanting to burn everything in the world. Bang! Her palms once again slapped the autumn water sword. The autumn water sword immediately turned fiery red, as if it had been melted by the high temperature. Ah! Junko could not help but let out a scream. Her palms felt as if they were on fire, and she subconsciously wanted to let go. However, her firm willpower stopped this stupid instinctive impulse. She hurriedly retreated while circulating her inner strength to counteract the heat in her palms. Seeing that the opponent retreated after one strike, without any of the previous aggressiveness, Wu's spirit was greatly aroused. With a low roar, she pounced forward like a fierce tiger descending the mountain. Li Xiaotian was dumbstruck at this scene and muttered to himself, "How can she be so powerful?" Yes, even with her experience, it was hard to imagine that Wu could turn the situation around in the blink of an eye and completely suppress Junko. If it was her, she would definitely not be able to do this. She stared at Marshall's palm with burning eyes and said, "Everything is strange because of the martial arts she cultivates. Who gave her this set of martial arts?" Suddenly, her heart moved, and her eyes turned, locking onto Tang Zheng. Could it be him? He was 100% sure that the martial sect did not have this set of techniques, so with the experience and connections of the martial sect, only Tang Zheng could do this. Isn't he a cultivator? Shouldn't he be holding spells and cultivation manuals? How can he martial arts manual? She was puzzled. Of course, she did not expect that the dragon seal on Tang Zheng's forehead could directly reach a treasure trove like Langya Pavilion. Li Xiaotian could not help but feel a trace of jealousy. Back then, she had been in contact with Tang Zheng for more days than Wu. Furthermore, they had gone through trials and tribulations together in the 10,000 mountains. If she did not become enemies with him because of his identity as a cultivator, then wouldn't this martial arts manual be hers? At that moment, she was a little jealous of Wu. How could Wu have such good luck? She came from behind and obtained such a huge benefit. She had mixed feelings, but she quickly threw these emotions out of her mind. That was because the battle between Tang Zheng and the Imperial Tutor had undergone a drastic change. The Imperial Tutor raised his arm even higher. Tang Zheng had not figured out the other party's intentions, but Li Xiaotian had already seen some clues. She looked at the stream behind the Imperial Tutor in shock. The stream seemed to be controlled by a terrifying force and had already stopped flowing. Crash! The stream suddenly soared into the air, turning into droplets of water. The droplets passed by the Imperial Tutor and shot straight towards the four symbols venerable. The water droplets condensed into lines that were like thousands of sharp swords. Thousands of swords shot out at the same time, slashing towards the four symbols venerable. The four symbols venerable's huge body had nowhere to hide. Tang Zheng also instantly realized the other party's intentions. Too powerful, he actually managed to draw the stream's water into swords. The four symbols venerable hurriedly placed one hand in front of his chest to protect himself. His other hand clenched into a fist and punched out. The air crackled like a sudden clap of thunder as a shockwave was sent forward. Boom, boom, boom. The shockwave struck the water swords, which immediately turned into droplets of water that scattered down. However, there were still some water swords that slipped through the net and ruthlessly slashed at the four symbols venerable's chest and arm. Sword after sword. The huge force caused the four symbols venerable to almost lose his balance. His huge body was on the verge of collapse. Tang Zheng could clearly sense the rumbling coming from the four symbols venerable's chest. It was like a sledgehammer had struck his arm, but it was also clearly transmitted through his arm to his chest. Hey, you can block it once, but can you block it a second time or a third time? Doesn't your Huaxia have a saying that dripping water penetrates a stone? Today, I can test this saying, the imperial tutor proudly said, a faint and savage smile appearing on his face. Dripping water penetrates a stone. Tang Zheng was shaken. Wasn't the imperial tutor planning to use the soft to conquer the hard? Dripping water penetrates a stone was not a legend. If the imperial tutor was allowed to continue his attacks, it was unknown whether this seemingly invulnerable four symbols venerable would be able to endure. Li Xiaotian had clearly seen this point, and her eyes grew more and more complicated. At this moment, Tang Zheng's defeat was of no benefit to her. The imperial tutor was clearly more ambitious than Tang Zheng, and also more skilled at scheming. If the imperial tutor grew stronger, it would definitely do more harm than good to Huaxia and the Li Palace. Previously, she had been prepared to remain uninvolved, but the appearance of the Inferno Divine Palm made her realize that Tang Zheng was a massive treasure trove. If it fell into the imperial tutor's hands for nothing, it would be letting the imperial tutor own this treasure trove, which would be letting him off too easily. Lend a hand to Tang Zheng. A voice emerged from the bottom of her heart, but she did not rashly attack. The imperial tutor was too powerful, and with her meager abilities, the slightest carelessness would result in her being beheaded. She did not believe that at this crucial moment, the imperial tutor would care about her status as the holy maiden of the Li Palace. She stared at the battle, searching for an opportunity to strike. The four symbols venerable had already become a drowned rat. Its entire body was soaked, and even Xiaobai on its shoulder was soaked. It fiercely shook its thin and small body, sending droplets of water into the air. It grinned and let out a long squeak. Tang Zheng knew that it was truly enraged, so he shouted, "Xiaobai, attack!" In order to break the imperial tutor's attempt to break through the stone with dripping water, he could only use Xiaobai as an elite force. Xiaobai obeyed, and its squeak suddenly became sharp and resounding. It raised its head and expanded its chest, its small mouth raised high. Its eyes turned fiery red, and the droplets of water on its body instantly evaporated. Boom! A fireball was spat out of its small mouth. However, this fireball did not rapidly fly forward. Instead, it floated in front of the four symbols venerable, constantly spinning as it absorbed the surrounding air. Gradually, the fireball began to grow at a visible rate. Fiery red replaced the color in front of it, and as far as the eye could see, everything was fiery red. When the water swords struck this ball of fire, they immediately evaporated into water vapor, finding it difficult to harm the four symbols venerable in the slightest. The imperial tutor's expression flickered at this sight, and he angrily said, "A little brat wants to influence the battle? Die." Swoosh! Thousands of water swords suddenly condensed into a line, forming a gigantic water sword. With the stream as the source, it slashed at the fireball. Squeak! Whitey raised its neck and cried out loudly. Its snow-white fur immediately underwent an earth-shattering change, completely turning into a fiery red color. It was as if it had turned into a ball of fire. Boom! The water sword slashed at the fireball. Sparks and water splattered in all directions, overflowing with light and color. It was extremely beautiful. However, this beauty contained an earth-shattering danger. It was evident from the surrounding vegetation that was hit by the water droplets and sparks. The vegetation looked as if it had been shot by a machine gun, and was in a complete mess. If a person was hit, the outcome would not be much better. The imperial tutor's expression was a little strange. He suddenly pointed his finger forward, and the stream water bubbled and boiled, quickly adding into the water sword. The fireball was sent flying backwards, almost crashing into the body of the four symbols venerable. Immediately, the imperial tutor revealed a smug look and said, "Now you know what it means to be a mantis trying to stop a chariot, right?" Xiaobai ignored the imperial tutor's mockery. It yelled and leaped off the four symbols venerable's shoulder, crashing straight into the ball of fire. "Xiaobai!" Tang Zheng turned pale with fright, and could not help but cry out. He had never seen Xiaobai use this move as if he was facing a great enemy. He did not know what this move meant, or if there was any danger. Seeing Xiaobai being engulfed by the flames, Tang Zheng was also enraged. He roared at the top of his lungs, "I'll fight it out with you." He took a deep breath, and true qi began to circulate wildly in his veins. In an instant, the air around his body began to vibrate, and his bones began to crackle. His hair and beard stood on end, and he looked like a mad lion. His eyes were bloodshot as he glared at the imperial tutor. Kachak. Tang Zheng clenched his fists so tightly that his fingernails almost sank into his flesh. At the same time, the four symbols venerable also clenched his fists and stomped his feet on the ground. The stone slabs on the ground immediately cracked and shattered into pieces. Kill! Tang Zheng roared furiously. The four symbols venerable's huge body was like a cannonball that had been fired, charging straight at the imperial tutor. The four symbols knight passed through the fireball and the water sword and charged directly at the imperial tutor's body. Two huge fists were like two meteors flying from outer space. They whistled through the air and smashed directly at the imperial tutor's head. The imperial tutor's expression changed drastically. He could deal with Tang Zheng with ease because he was fully focused on attacking. At the moment he was fully focused on the water sword, but he dared not underestimate Tang Zheng's frenzied attacks. Chapter 682. The four symbols venerable rushed in front of the state preceptor. The state preceptor crossed his hands, and a broken sword suddenly appeared in his hand. Yes, he was holding a broken sword in his hand. As if facing a great enemy, he frowned. He raised the broken sword in his hand high and casually slashed at the four symbols venerable. Boom! The water sword exploded and was turned into water vapor by the fireball, disappearing without a trace. The ball of flame trembled and fell to the ground. The flame was extinguished, revealing Xiaobai's thin body. Its fur turned snow-white again, and the spirit in its eyes had clearly weakened. It looked at the back of the four symbols venerable and grinned, as if saying that it had done its best. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the four symbols venerable's huge fist had already reached the state preceptor's head. The powerful pressure caused the ground to cave in, and the state preceptor fell into the pit, drowning his short figure. Clang! Suddenly, the broken sword rose from the pit and collided with the huge fist. The soil around the pit immediately flew out as if it had been affected by a huge shockwave. Tang Zheng clenched his teeth and pressed his fist down a little, completely sealing the top of the pit and burying the state preceptor in it. State preceptor. Seeing this, Junko let out a heart-wrenching scream, and her movements involuntarily slowed by half a beat. She had been forced to retreat step by Wu, and was surrounded by dangers. Now that her movements were half a beat slower, Wu immediately seized this rare opportunity. Bang! The Inferno Underworld palm imprinted on Junko's chest, and she flew back like a kite with a broken string. She crashed into the stream, splashing water droplets all over the sky. Wu took advantage of the opportunity to give her a fatal blow, but when she caught up to Junko, she saw her fingers moving, forming a complicated hand seal. Junko revealed a strange smile to Wu, and in the next second she disappeared. Escape technique. Wu fiercely stomped her foot. She was still a step too late. Junko had this strange escape technique, so it was easier said than done to kill her. She hurriedly turned her head to look in the direction of Tang Zheng. The guardian of four symbols' giant fist had already sealed off the crater. There was no movement in the crater, as if the Grand Preceptor had been suffocated to death. What's going on? Tang Zheng frowned and carefully moved the four symbols' venerable's fist away. Ha! The crater was empty, not even a shadow could be seen. Shit! Tang Zheng's heart skipped a beat, and he cursed in his heart. The Imperial Preceptor had also used the Earth Escape technique, and it was obvious that he had long escaped from the huge pit. But he definitely wouldn't run away. This was his headquarters. Tang Zheng suddenly had an ominous premonition, and subconsciously turned his head to look. His pupils involuntarily widened as he screamed, "Wu, be careful behind you!" Wu Jingran was shocked, and slapped backwards with his palm. The Fire Underworld Divine Palm was more than enough to deal with Junko, but after all, Wu Jingran had not cultivated the fire underworld divine palm to the peak. Therefore, this seemingly tyrannical palm did not cause any waves, and was easily dissolved by the Imperial Preceptor behind him. The Imperial Preceptor had used the Earth Escape technique to escape behind Wu Jingran, and then took the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. How could Wu Jingran be his opponent? Wu Jingran fell into the Imperial Preceptor's palm, and the broken sword was placed on her neck, forming a sharp contrast with her white and tender skin. The Imperial Preceptor's head popped out from behind Wu Jingran, and he clicked his tongue and said, "Tangzheng, you are really powerful, far beyond my expectations. Whether it is you, this huge monster, or that little guy, you have all broadened my horizons." Imperial Preceptor, what are you doing? Tangzheng was unable to restrain his anger as he asked, "Hey, don't you know what I want to do? If you obediently surrender, then I will let her go. Otherwise, I will let you watch her die. In any case, she is of no use to me. If I kill her, then kill her. It is not a pity at all," the Imperial Advisor said with a murderous aura, as if the broken sword in his hand could cut Wu's throat at any time. "You..." Tangzheng was flustered and exasperated, but he was speechless. This was a battlefield, cruel, and the slightest mistake would cause the situation to take a turn for the worse. However, in the end, Tangzheng did not expect that the Imperial Preceptor, a grandmaster of a generation, would actually use someone else to threaten Tangzheng. This was not the bearing of a grandmaster of a generation. Obviously, the Imperial Preceptor was a person who was guided by his goals. As long as he could achieve his goals, the process and methods were not important. "I will count to 3. If you don't come out from there, I will immediately kill her in front of you," the Imperial Preceptor threatened. Without a doubt, he was not bluffing, so Tangzheng did not dare to be careless and immediately shouted, "No, I'll come out." "Don't worry about me," Wu shouted loudly. "Be good, you can't die," Tangzheng advised. "If you come out, both of us will die." "But I can't watch you die without doing anything. Then I'll die immediately. You don't have to be threatened anymore," Marshall said resolutely. Then, with a tilt of his neck, he slashed towards the broken sword. "Haha. Are you courting death? It's not that easy." The Imperial Preceptor tapped on Marshall's body, and her acupoints were immediately sealed. She could no longer move and could not even commit suicide. Marshall could not help but reveal a look of despair as he roared with a heart-wrenching voice, "If you have the guts, then kill me." "Hee, if Tangzheng doesn't do as I say, I will definitely kill you without hesitation," the Imperial Preceptor said with a smile. "I'll start counting 1. As soon as this number came out, Tangzheng immediately jumped out of the 4 Symbols Venerable's body and shouted, "Don't kill her, I'm out." When he jumped down from the 4 Symbols Venerable, he immediately put him into the Sumeru pouch. Seeing that, the Imperial Preceptor's eyes immediately burned with passion. He sized up Tangzheng from head to toe like a monster looking at Tangzheng's meat, wishing that he could immediately pounce on him and eat him. "Why are you doing this? For me, it's not worth it." Marshall's emotions were extremely complicated. He was both regretful and moved. If he did not drag him down, then Tangzheng would not have been threatened. At this moment, she hated herself to the core. She had never hated herself so much before. She was too useless and would only drag him down. Why didn't she just die? Tangzheng forced a smile. "How could I just watch you die? What's so scary about death? At most, I'll accompany you." Marshall's emotions rose and fell. His eyes became moist, and he really had the urge to cry. In this world, other than master and mistress, no one had ever treated her so well. They didn't even care about their own lives for her. "If I have a next life, I'll still be your woman." She silently made up her mind in her heart. In this life, she had already decided to follow Tangzheng, and that was to be his woman. Even though this was a promise she had made to Tangzheng. But at this moment, her heart had completely melted. She was truly devoted to him. Not only in this life, but also in the next life, she wanted to chase after him and be his woman. Marshall didn't know much about love, but there was one thing she understood very well. If a person was willing to risk his life for her, then she would be willing to follow him wholeheartedly. All of this was so simple. There weren't so many reasons, nor were there so many grand things about love. Simple, direct, straightforward. When Li Xiaotian saw this scene, she couldn't help but feel a little jealous of Marshall. Her thoughts were even more meticulous than Marshall, but she also understood how difficult it was for a man to sacrifice his life for a woman. This kind of thing was almost extinct. But Wu's luck was too good. He had met someone like Tang Jing just like that. She was a little annoyed and felt that she was a little pitiful. She had schemed and schemed everywhere, but in the end, what she got was far less than a careless and foolish woman like Wu. No, I want more. If others have it, I want it too. If others don't have it, I want it too. Li Xiaotian silently clenched his fists. It's truly moving. You're actually willing to give up your life for her. The imperial advisor laughed in surprise and said disdainfully, "Is this the love that you young people are talking about?" Haha, love is just a superfluous thing. It will only make people emotional and turn them into fools. In the end, the one who will suffer is themselves. Tang Jing didn't know if this was love, but one thing was certain. For her, Marshall did not hesitate to take the risk and forcefully charge into the imperial palace to save him. At the same time, he could do the same. Was this love? He didn't care what it was. What he wanted to do was to find every opportunity to save Marshall from the imperial advisor's hands. Wu Mingliang blinked her eyes. The word love made her heart beat violently. She couldn't help but ask herself, was this really love? Love, what an ethereal thing. She had never hoped for it, nor even thought about it. She stared straight at Tang Jing, as if she wanted to discern the answer from his face. But Tang Jing didn't have the mood to think about this. He walked towards the imperial advisor with large strides, but in the end he stopped a few meters away. The imperial advisor frowned and scolded. "What are you stopping for? Do you want her to die?" Tang Jing remained unmoved and said resolutely, "I know what you want the most." He pointed to his own head. "You want the knowledge in my mind, but if I die immediately, do you think you have a way to take these things out of a dead person's head? What do you mean?" The imperial advisor had a bad premonition and hurriedly asked. Tang Jing revealed a brilliant smile. His two neat rows of snow-white teeth were extremely beautiful, giving Marshall a dazzling feeling, causing his heart to palpitate. "Although I can't control you, I can control myself. If I were to commit suicide immediately, would you still be able to get what you want?" The state preceptor's eyes suddenly widened as he shouted, "Stop." Obviously, he didn't expect Tang Jing to be so ruthless to him, and even dare to kill him. This was a trait that almost no one possessed. "Whether or not you stop depends on you." Tang Jing's smile was still clean and bright, like sunlight shining into the bottom of Marshall's heart. Her heart seemed to melt as tears welled up in her eyes. Ever since she was young, she had never shed tears for a man. In fact, she had never shed tears at all. No matter how difficult the situation was, she would grit her teeth and endure it. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.